President's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route.
The JFK files were just released.
The National Archives released thousands of new pages of declassified records related to President John F. Kennedy's assassination.
80,000 pages of documents is a lot to sift through. Can you just tell us who killed Kennedy?
Who should be held culpable?
I don't want to point my finger at anyone in a case like
There's numerous
this.
people running up the hill alongside Elm Street.
Who were the two men on the grassy knoll? Who were they?
This guy's like a radio man. He looks like a Cuban. He's out of place, and he's sitting right next to the umbrella man.
There's Rip Robertson, photographs of Rip Robertson, who's the field operations commander for the S-Force, standing right there in Dealey Plaza. You got Ed Lansdale. Photographs of Lansdale sitting right there, and his wife identifying it. The thing that I find to be so special about what we now know is the relationship that Oswald had with all these guys.
Yes, sir. Back up, man. Come on, man. President. I'm just a patsy. President.
All of this is a side product of deception and duplicity.
And to think that he was alone, taken completely by surprise by this, nonsense. It's nonsense, man. It was all set up by the highest levels, and they got away with it for 62 years.
The JFK files were just released.
The National Archives, a short time ago, released thousands of new pages of declassified records related to President John F. Kennedy's assassination.
So you have 80,000 documents that require a lot of, artificial intelligence overlay, optical character recognition to make any sense of. Even then, I think very few people made any sense of them. I think they left more confused. There's a great quote by Brett Weinstein where it's like looking through the JFK files is like looking for a needle in the haystack where the needle is missing. And even President Trump, when he was asked point blank who killed JFK after the file drop, he said, we released the files, we did a historic thing or whatever.
80,000 pages of documents is a lot to sift through. Yeah. Can you just tell us who killed Kennedy?
Well, I was given the task of releasing that because many presidents have gone through it and they haven't released. And I said, release. We even released Social Security numbers. I didn't want anything deleted. They said, so what about Social Security?
But he kind of sidestepped the, point blank question is who should be held culpable?
That's right.
And I don't think anybody has a good answer to that after that file release. I'm here with Jeremy Riss, alien scientist. You've been making epic videos for 20 years on not only UFOs and aliens, but often the science, the secret science behind all this stuff, along with sprinkle in some of your favorite conspiracies. And I can't wait to speak to you, man. We've had some phone conversations. We don't agree on everything.
No,
but
don't have to.
We don't have to. That's the point of having conversations. And I'm excited to have you, man. Thank you for being here.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me. It's great to finally be here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, there's so many jumping off points. There were just these JFK disclosures, right? Like, what, 80,000? How many documents? Like
a whole bunch. And then there's, how many things they didn't write down. You gotta think like you're planning to murder somebody. You don't write stuff down and keep a log and a whole bunch of incriminating evidence on yourself. So there's a lot of cool stuff in the documents that have come out so far. But, really, you learn more from talking to long-term assassination researchers who've been
way more. I feel like people came out of this way more confused than
a lot of people
before.
did. Yeah, there's a lot of the media used it as an opportunity to once again, hype up this idea that there's nothing in the documents, there's nothing new here. This is all just conspiracy theories. The typical Operation Mockingbird mantras and whatnot. But the JFK research community has cracked this case, and they've cracked it for number of years. I mean, Jim Marrs was one of the first with Crossfire. That was the book that Oliver Stone's JFK was based on. And that really laid the foundation for a lot of the investigations that followed. And there's been decades and decades, and tons of people have dug into this from every possible angle. And now it's just come out that, Priscilla McMillan, who interviewed Lee when he went to Russia, and also befriended Marina Oswald and wrote her autobiography for her. She's a CIA agent. She's a witting CIA asset. And that came out in one of the things that was revealed in the documents, which shows the level that they went through to get ahead of the sources in the story and be like, all right, we're gonna put our people in so that anyone getting information about this from the sources has to go through us, basically.
So I know you to be, as deep on the topic as maybe anybody alive, and you have a very coherent narrative. So what do you think happened? Who killed JFK?
The shot that was fired from the knoll that killed him was Morales, David Morales. And he was called the Mexican. There are kind of different nicknames they had for him, but he was the crack shot out of the team, the S-Force team that had been put together to kill Fidel Castro. And it was a triangular fire team plan, to have 3 gunmen crossfire at a moving target. That was the plan. That was the structure that they'd set up and that they trained down in Oaxaca, Mexico, at the ranch of Clint Murchison Jr. They trained them up down there to do that, to kill not only Fidel Castro, but Raul Castro and Che Guevara and 5 other comandantes they had on the list.
So this was the 5412 committee, which was run by Nixon under Eisenhower. He's setting up these sort of covert operations to take out Che Guevara and Castro. But then they get used in the assassination of JFK. How does that occur?
Well, what happened is that the people on the task force, the people that were recruited to be on the S-Force to kill Castro, in short, Castro and Che Guevara and the others, that they were rabid anti-communist Cubanos that had fled from Cuba in January of 1959 when Batista was overthrown. And they all fled up to Florida and camped out basically in Miami and Tampa primarily. And a lot of them were Mafia gunmen that worked for Santos Trafficante, who was the Don of the Mafia in Havana and ran the gambling casinos, the houses of prostitution, but most importantly, the heroin smuggling that was coming in from Southeast Asia, because that was critical, because a portion of the profits from the heroin sales that were going on through the Mafia run by Santos Trafficante and the Gambinos, that they were running the heroin into the United States, and a portion of the profits that were being skimmed off that sale were being used to purchase military equipment and explosives to smuggle to the Kuomintang in China.
Whoa. So this is pre-Iran-Contra, but the same sort of architecture.
Same thing.
Same move.
And that that's where they got the idea to keep doing it, so that they had the whole thing set up where the portion of the heroin income was being used to purchase the explosives and weapons. There was a company set up with offices in Havana and in Miami that was the Sea Supply Corporation, they called it. And on the face of it is a SEA. It's a Sea Supply Corporation, some kind of maritime thing. It was a Southeast Asian supply company run by Paul Helliwell, the full-time Central Intelligence Agency employee running the operation.
So he was getting the money to the Kuomintang?
He was actually using the money from the heroin smuggling, a portion of it, to purchase the weapons and explosives here. And then they would fly them from here. And that was that whole Terry and the Pirates thing, what they call flying the hump. That they had this whole operation that a fellow named William D. Pauley worked for Prentice Aviation, and they were providing the airplanes, and they were smuggling them and flying them into China. So there was Claire Booth Luce was involved in it.
Really? Henry Luce's wife.
That's right. And it was in Dulles was involved. They were all involved in that. That's what they call the China lobby. That was that whole group that right from way back had figured that they were planning to really turn the development operations of their economic investments into Asia.
And Henry Luce then starts Life and Time magazine, which publishes the Zapruder film with the missing frames of the JFK assassination.
That's right.
So that's a very interesting connection as well.
Which, I know the guy that got the film.
Dick Billings.
Yeah, Dick Billings, and knew all about how they brought it to Rochester and doctored it. He sat and told me about the whole thing.
That's wild. So he talks about them doctoring the film and taking certain frames out and stuff. And did the frames involve David Morales and the other men on the grass?
No, it's just that it made it clear that he was shot from the front.
Okay,
you could tell from that thing, so that they reversed the actual frames of the film.
And then the guy who let out the Zapruder film is a guy named Charles Douglas Jackson, who was basically ran psychological warfare for the United States. He was in the Psychological Strategy Board with Gordon Gray and some of these other guys. Yeah. And he let out the Zapruder film in Life magazine, which he was involved with, but with missing frames. And that was a big thing. The other guy that ran the psychological warfare program for JM Wave station was George Joannides. And it recently came out that, these files prove that he lied about his involvement with the program, because they asked him, who ran the program? He said, I don't know, I'll have to look and check for you. And he never got back. They never got back to that question, never resolved that. Well, he's the one that ran the program. How do you not know who ran the program? You ran the program. And you lied about it to Congress and in front of and the whole entire of America. So that one came out. That was a huge one. Anslinger too. Not Anslinger. Angleton, James Jesus Angleton, and he was running this whole spying program, the mail intercept program, and this guy Reuben Efron was in charge of that. And Reuben Efron is in the files, and they ask him about, do you know Reuben Efron? And he says, no. That's a lie. You hired Reuben Efron, and he ran the spy program for you that was reading Lee Harvey Oswald's mail and spying on this dude for years, because he had a 201 file into the CIA since 1959. So that they have a massive file on Lee Harvey Oswald, following all his actions, and to think that he was a lone nut and that we didn't know, we had no idea, and we were taken completely by surprise by this nonsense. It's nonsense, man. It was all set up by the highest levels, and they got away with it for 62 years. But it's I don't want it to be too confusing to everybody. It's easier kind of having in a chronological structure to understand how this thing happened, because the entire operation was set up way back in 1960. When Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and the guys overthrew Batista and drove him out in January of 1959, Richard Nixon, as the vice president under Eisenhower and the chair of the 5412 committee that supervised covert operations, he sent all kinds of communications to Fidel Castro saying, look, you are fine, you've overthrown Batista, okay, it's a deal. What we want to do is make sure you don't have any diplomatic relations with China or Russia. You can't have, and he said, you can't have any kind of relations with them at all. And Fidel Castro said, screw you. Who do you think you're talking to here? They waved the old Monroe Doctrine flag at him, and so, which he didn't give a crap about, and so Nixon got really PO'd with him. And so he then set up this covert operation, which was called originally Operation 40. Okay. And then he recruited, naturally enough, a whole bunch of Batista supporters who supported the fascist authoritarian regime down there and worked directly with Santos Trafficante, because Santos Trafficante was the business partner of Batista and Paul Helliwell in running the heroin operations. And it was just a means of covert funding for the operations to oppose China, to oppose Mao Zedong. This is amazing. Yeah, and they didn't want to tell Congress about it at all, because they didn't think they could muster enough support from Congress to actually support covert operations against Mao Zedong. So they did it totally covertly. The CIA set up this entire operation to be supporting Chiang Kai-shek in the so-called nationalist forces. And the chief of security for Chiang Kai-shek was the head of the Green Gang, the major heroin operation in China. No way. Oh, yeah. Whoa. Oh, yeah. That is wild. Yeah. Okay, so in 59-60 time frame, you have the 5412 Commission and committee rather. Yeah. You have, of which Nixon is ahead, and he's sort of, running kind of national security. He partners with Mafia dons like Trafficante. Well, actually, he avoided that by one step. What he did is recruited Howard Hughes. Yeah. He called Howard Hughes because Howard Hughes was a consultant to the 5412 committee. He had designed the Spruce Goose, which became the prototype for the C-5A cargo plane that could fly, major covert operations and equipment and stuff. And he also designed the Glomar Explorer, that ship that could pick up Russian submarines off the bottom of the ocean and stuff if they fell through, and a couple other extraordinarily sensitive programs that he was working on. Like what? Yeah, I can't tell you. I can't tell you that.
because of the way I know.
You've said this before to me about Howard Hughes, and then I always go, is it the UFO stuff? You go, no.
No, it wasn't that. It was
like what else could be so sensitive? Is it like time travel or something? Or?
No, nothing esoteric like that.
You're a man of the people, Danny. We need to know.
Yeah.
As evidenced by Tim Dillon's recent and masterful interview with CNN, legacy media can be a bit problematic. It's more sensationalist and divided than ever. They ask leading questions brainwashed by their social milieus, and that's why people are flocking to podcasts. But podcasts have their own limits. They're often 3 hours long, they're not super efficient, they aren't always fact-checked, they're sort of a hybrid of entertainment and news. So how do I stay informed amidst this backdrop? I started using my new favorite service, Ground News, a tool designed for both skeptics and truth seekers like many in this community. Ground News is an app and website created by a former NASA engineer to tackle a problem we all face: how distorted the information is that we consume every day in the modern post-truth era. Ground News gathers coverage from over 50,000 sources worldwide, organizes the stories by topic, and even breaks down the bias and ownership behind each perspective so you know what you're getting. With features like the bias bar and factuality score, it's easy to see how different outlets frame and spin the same story. When you eat certain foods, you want to see the ingredients list. This is the same thing, but for content and news. For example, when I was researching those mysterious drone sightings in New Jersey in December, Ground News gave me instant access to over 200 articles, helping me uncover every angle, from the facts to the spin. Spoiler alert, I don't think they were just FAA-approved research drones. So if you're tired of echo chambers and one-sided narratives, Ground News is your ultimate tool for staying informed and making better decisions. You can follow your favorite topics and compare coverage to find the most credible sources. And for a limited time, you can get the same plan I use every day for nearly half the price. Just go to ground.news/Jesse Michels, Michels with no A, or scan this QR code to save 40% on their unlimited access Vantage plan, or gift it to someone you know and have more informed discussions and hopefully chill out about those drones. I only promote brands I vet, and I think you'll find them just as valuable as I do. Ground News, the truth is out there. You just need the right tools to find it.
It's one of those kind of things, that one of the very rare things that I tend to agree that it would not be good to tell people about it.
Sure.
It would generate all kinds of damage and it wouldn't really benefit anybody.
Got it.
It was the bottom line is, but because of that, he trusted Hughes. And so he contacts him using the red phone, the secure phone, which he had for the 5412 committee communications, called Howard Hughes, and Trafficante told us all this. This all came directly from Trafficante about how the whole thing happened, and actually told us the day on which Richard Nixon called on the phone Howard Hughes was the day after Nelson Rockefeller withdrew from the 1960 Republican presidential primary race against Nixon. Because as soon as he withdrew, Nixon knew he was going to be the nominee for the Republican Party in 1960, and he was sure he was going to win, right? So he then took upon himself the authority, basically, of the incoming president to contact Hughes and ask him to put together an assassination team.
Why did Rockefeller step down right then? I don't quite.
He just withdrew. He withdrew from the primary race for the.
Was that a coincidence or?
No. But what it did is it freed up Nixon to realize he was going to be the nominee for the Republican Party, and so he was therefore confident he was getting ready to be president.
Yeah.
And so he started exercising the kind of a power that a president might do. And so he took onto himself this kind of authority to actually reach out and have Howard Hughes set up an assassination team. Said, but you got to keep it completely away from the White House. So you just got to do it yourself. And so what Howard Hughes did is sent for one of his lawyers that he had, Bob Mayhew. And he assigned Mayhew, said, here's the job. The president they started referring to him as the president in their communications. Trafficante said so.
Oh my God.
They kept referring to him as the
Nixon
president.
as the president.
Yeah, they kept referring to him as the president.
Even though he was the VP.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they said, that he wants this done. He wants to keep it away from the White House. And so Bob Mayhew went to see, because, Howard Hughes was in Las Vegas. He was hanging out at the whether it was the
Flamingo,
or the Sands, one of the two.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was up in the big penthouse there,
Uh-huh.
and it was one of the mob hotels,
Uh-huh.
right? And so he knew that they were there. And so Bob Mayhew went to see Johnny Roselli, who was the bagman, for the Mafia skim, the skimming the cash off those casinos to be used, right? And so his principal, the guy in charge of him, was Sam Giancana out of Chicago. And so when Bob Mayhew went to Johnny Roselli and said, look, you guys have your own reason for wanting to get rid of this Castro dude. He shut down all your casinos, shut down your whorehouses, he said, and very importantly, they've cut off the whole heroin supply. Okay, and so that you got your own reasons for wanting to get rid of him. So that the Nixon is assuming that you'll do this for us. And so Johnny Roselli said, well, I don't have the authority to make a decision like that. We're going to have to talk to Sam Giancana. And so they went together. Johnny Roselli and Bob Mayhew went to Chicago and met with Sam Giancana and pitched the proposal to him. And Sam Giancana realized that doing a favor like this for the president was going to get them a lot of potential goodwill, right? And keep the feds off their back. So he was agreeing in principle to do it. He said, but this isn't up to me. That's Santos Traficante's territory. That's down in Havana. He's the mob boss in Havana. Even though he's up in Tampa now because he left Cuba. He said, so we have to go talk to him. So they went down. They went down to see him. Now they were down there in about September or so. This all started around June 7th. It was when Rockefeller withdrew, June 7th of 1960. So between that, it's now early September, Johnny Roselli, Bob Mayhew, and Sam Giancana went down to Florida and at the Fontainebleau Hotel, met with Traficante, and they had two meetings, in which finally Traficante tells us that he said, I agreed in principle to do this. He said, but I wanted to make sure that, he said, it wasn't some kind of brain fart, he said, on the part of Bob Mayhew or even Howard Hughes. Wanted to make certain that this was coming from the president. That's how he termed it. He said, and so that they had a third meeting, and another guy comes to the meeting at the Fontainebleau Hotel using the nom de guerre Mr. Ed. And it was Sheffield Edwards, who was the chief of security of the Central Intelligence Agency under Dulles, okay, and under the Eisenhower-Bush administration. But so he comes to the meeting and gives them the green light to go ahead and do this. And so what Traficante did is he recruited guys from his people that were from Havana, these gunmen that he had down there, that were enforcers who had fled with him to Florida in January of 1959 and had gotten recruited by Richard Nixon and the CIA to run covert operations against Cuba. Because when Fidel Castro just finally thumbed his nose at Nixon and said, screw you, I'm going to have relations with anybody I want. So I'll have diplomatic relations with Russia and China, therefore, quote, violating the Monroe Doctrine, of allowing a foreign power to start having influence inside our hemisphere, or our zone of influence. And so what happened is Richard Nixon had mounted this covert operation, and he'd recruited all of these people that were Traficante gunmen and mobsters, basically, but virulent anti-communists, and we're all in around Miami. They had the 2506 Brigade. They had Alpha 66. There were a bunch of these kind of, it's unfair to call them covens, but I mean, they were these gangs that were there that were engaged in covert operation, and so they thought that they were kind of invested with kind of a certain kind of authority on the part of the federal government because they're paid by the CIA. To do this. And they set up these bases. They set one up on No Name Key. They set one up on Swan Island. They put one in the Everglades. And then they had 2 of them at Lake Pontchartrain over in Louisiana, one on the southern coast of Lake Pontchartrain, one on the northern coast. And they set up these paramilitary bases in these rabidly anti-communist, pro-Batista, Trafficante gunmen, a lot of them, were covert operators working under the auspices of the CIA to run these covert operations. So Trafficante says, okay, Nixon wants me to put together this assassination team. I'm going to take my people who are working with the CIA, but in a completely different capacity, just to run covert operations. What I'm going to do is recruit 15 of them. I'll handpick them, and we'll put them into this special S-Force, they call it. And that's what they did. And they would send private planes to go pick them up, at these 5 different paramilitary bases. They would pick up a couple of the guys at each one, and they would fly them to Fort Huachuca in Arizona, and big electronic surveillance operations that they've got going there in Fort Huachuca. And so they'd bring them there, and then they would sign in, and then they would just disappear off the records. And then they were flown down to Oaxaca, Mexico, to the ranch of Clint Murchison Jr., a very wealthy scion of this oil fortune down there, who his father owned the Dallas Texans football team.
Cowboys.
Well, later Cowboys. It was Texans.
Texans at the time. Okay, interesting.
That's who they were, and horse racing and rich people and stuff. And so they had this big ranch down in Oaxaca. So they set up a triangular fire team base down there to practice shooting a moving target from 3 different locations to get a triangular crossfire onto the site, onto the target. And they were training them. And Carl Jenkins was brought in from the CIA to train them on this under ZR rifle. It was the code name for the program. But this was a whole separate thing, and it was not even known to many people at all that this was going on, because they were trying to keep it away from the White House. So that operation was going on. And the way they funded it was from the skim of money off the casinos. And they would skim the money off the casinos. They would put the cash into these brand new, big, expensive suitcases and put them in the trunk of brand new Cadillac automobiles. And they would drive them. And I know the guy that sold them the Cadillacs, because he had the big dealership there.
Whoa.
In Vegas. Then I interviewed him at length about it. And so that they drive the cars through New Orleans, and Marcello was there, and they did the audit on all the money to keep track of how much money they were moving, and then they would repack it and they would drive them into Florida, deposit it in the Miami National Bank of Meyer Lansky, and then they would wire a portion of the money down into the Banco Internacional down in Mexico City. And they put it into this account by this lawyer by Mivogario had the account down in the bank. And then they would pay the costs for the whole triangular fire team training base down in Oaxaca. And that's
So how do you go from this systematic drug running covert operation that ultimately is in support of the resistance in China, the Kuomintang and the Chiang Kai-shek? How do you go from that and then this plan initially to take out Che Guevara and Castro, who are impinging upon the Monroe Doctrine, to killing JFK, sitting president?
What happened is that whole operation was going when suddenly Richard Nixon didn't get elected.
John F. Kennedy of the state of Massachusetts has received for President of the United States 303 votes. Richard M. Nixon of the state of California has received 219 votes. This is the first time in 100 years that a candidate for the presidency announced the result of an election in which he was defeated and announced the victory of his opponent. All of you work in a cause that is bigger than any man's ambition, greater than any party. It is the cause of freedom, of justice, and peace for all mankind. And it is in that spirit that I now declare that John F. Kennedy has been elected President of the United States and Lyndon Johnson Vice President of the United States.
and Kennedy comes in, and they brief Kennedy now about the Bay of Pigs plan that they had going, but they didn't tell him about the assassination team at all.
Hey guys, I want to tell you about my new favorite piece of apparel. These are called the Perfect Jeans. They're literally the perfect jeans. I used to wear jeans all the time, and they're kind of rough and not super stretchy or breathable. These are extremely comfortable. They work in casual environments. They work in work settings. They come in 6 different sizes from 26 inches to 50 inches, and they're all around just amazing. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping at theperfectgene.nyc. Again, that's theperfectgene.nyc, or just Google The Perfect Gene. Use code Jesse15 for that 15% off. Again, that's code Jesse15. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc. After purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you. Fuck your khakis. Get the perfect gene.
And so they lure him into to allowing the invasion to go on, the attempted invasion at the Bay of Pigs. But he tells them right from the very beginning that he won't provide air cover. He won't provide any air cover. And he won't provide any kind of U.S. military intervention. You know, they wanted to be able to land on the beach and basically raise the flag of free Cuba and then ask for U.S. intervention and do it the old-fashioned way.
Yep.
You know, just send in a paramilitary operation. And Kennedy wouldn't do it. And they said, he said, look, if you're telling me that the people of Cuba want to rise up against Castro because they're so unhappy with him, if they land on the beach and they raise the flag of a free Cuba, if the people all rally and toss out Castro, good. If you're telling me the truth that they're going to do it, you go ahead and do it.
Yep.
And what happened is they had 2 or 3, B-25s, or these old bomber planes that were down in Nicaragua, actually, Somoza, Anastasio Somoza was supporting them in doing this. Was this kind of right-wing fascist dude. And so the bottom line is that they were going to provide their own air cover for this. And what happened is they were in a different time zone. And so they got there an hour late after the landing. And the guys had been whacked already. They sank their ammunition boat and everything, and so they were trapped on the beach, and they all got arrested, and the whole thing fell through.
Wednesday, April 19th, resistance ends. All those who are not killed are taken prisoner.
And then Kennedy took responsibility for it. And this is where the thing starts. Kennedy took responsibility for it. And the Cubano guys that got all arrested were upset at him for refusing not only to provide air support, but they had, in fact, General Curtis LeMay and other folks from the Joint Chiefs had actually moved U.S. military forces into place. They put naval ships with Marines in them, staged them contrary to the orders of the president. Ordered in the Marines.
There was so much at the time that Curtis LeMay felt the liberty to do by himself. Like he put, apparently, I didn't even know this during the Cuban Missile Crisis later, obviously, he put us into DEFCON 2 without the president's permission.
He did.
It's crazy.
He did. And launched the U-2, ordered the U-2 to fly over Russia to do the final retargeting, which was, and did it at a low altitude that he knew the Russians would pick it up to send them the signals. He was trying to goad them into trying to initiate a nuclear war, So the bottom line is that all that was going on at this time. And what happened is Kennedy took responsibility for it. Of the snafu. And what he did is he apologized to Khrushchev for having allowed that thing to go down, and gave Khrushchev, Kennedy did, his solemn promise that he would cease and desist from efforts to undermine the government in Cuba. And he went down to Cuba, went down to Miami at the Orange Bowl, actually, and convened a whole meeting of all these kind of right-wing Cubano refugees that had fled from there in the whole stadium. He apologized to them all in person. Said that he gave them his personal guarantee that the free flag of Cuba would be flying over the island by the end of his second term. And he said that to them.
I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana.
They said, okay, that we got you. And he turned around and had lied to Khrushchev and actually converted Operation 40 into Operation Mongoose. That's all it did. And set up the big operation on the University of Miami campus called JM Wave, this great big gigantic airplane set of hangars, and they had all the operations going on there. It was a full-scale war operation going on against Cuba. And so he continued doing that. And so Khrushchev said, screw you then, and started moving missiles in. And so all this was happening all right in that first period. From 1961. He's elected in November of 1960, comes into office in January of 1961. You know, he does all this apologizing and stuff because it was in April of 61 that the Bay of Pigs thing came down. And so he apologizes, but he's totally pissed off, you know, at the CIA for bungling this whole operation. And the days of Allen Dulles were numbered. And so he waited all the way till the fall, in September, October, you know, of 61, and then pushed Dulles out. But Dulles didn't leave. He didn't leave Washington. He had his whole setup over in Georgetown in his big brownstone over there. And all of the guys from the CIA were going over to meet with him like every day.
He had like a social club. Wasn't it called the Georgetown Set? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Georgetown's a very, we won't get too far, but it's a very interesting place, you know, with every administration. You've got these very wealthy,
beautiful
social
brownstone kind of old houses.
I've been in a bunch of them.
Yeah.
You know? And again, recently, the new administration has got people over there.
Yeah.
You know,
I remember being in Michael Pillsbury's house, which I think was JFK's old house.
Yeah.
In Georgetown.
Yeah.
And just being like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So cool. I mean, he's been a kind of lead China expert in every administration since Nixon.
Yeah.
And
it's a very elite group over there. You know, so the bottom line is that so the whole operation shifts over to Operation Mongoose, being run out of JM Wave. And Khrushchev starts sending the missiles into Cuba, and then they discover the missiles in there. The whole Cuban Missile Crisis comes down, right?
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
Goes all the way through into late October, right? And then this bizarre thing happens with the UFO, right? And we'll just set that aside for a moment, because it's a very kind of comparatively new piece of information. But the bottom line is that by the time they get to October 26th, the night of October 26th, they come to within like 2 minutes. This whole thing with General Curtis LeMay trying to instigate an actual nuclear exchange with Russia, saying that, look, the Russia, if they launch nuclear missiles against us, they'll kill maybe 40 million people. You know, but we'll wipe them all out, and we'll get rid of that entire scourge of communism coming out of Russia, and then we'll win because we've only lost 40 million people, and we'll have eliminated Russia as a threat. And that was his whole thinking, right? And the bottom line is Kennedy is so completely horrified at how close they came to the nuclear war. This is where it starts now. And what happened is he reached back out to Khrushchev, said, okay, you're right, I lied to you. You know, you're right, we kept on doing the Operation Mongoose, you know, but you shouldn't have put the missiles in there. We're going to make a deal, you know, that I'll take the missiles out of Turkey, you take the missiles out of here. And he ordered all of those bases, those paramilitary bases, to cease and desist from any further operations. But he didn't know about the assassination team that had been deployed. But he ordered this shutting down of all the bases. And what happens is in December of 1962, Frank Sturgis, who is the CIA liaison to the Cubano guys out on No Name Key. He decides he's going to, even after getting the orders from the president, that they're all to stand down and to discontinue their operations. He, in complete defiance with the Cubans, launches an assault into Cuba and sinks a Russian ship.
Whoa.
Which, like, nobody knows about, anymore. But they sank a Russian ship.
When was this?
It's December of 1962.
Whoa.
Sinks a Russian ship. Kennedy freaks out over the fact that, he'd already lied to Khrushchev once, and he couldn't stand for doing it again. The whole thing would fall apart. And so what he does is he sends in, he and Bobby, who's the Attorney General, they send in 6 helicopter gunships with U.S. Marshals. Because he couldn't trust the FBI because of Hoover. And so he sends in U.S. Marshals, and they burn out the base at No Name Key and arrest all those guys, including Sturgis, and charge them with a violation of the Neutrality Act, mounting military operations against a country with whom we have diplomatic relations, right? And hold them for almost a week and then let them go. Okay, but it's kind of a shot across the bow. The president's serious. The AG's in on it. You're not going to do this anymore. Then a second group, the ones in the Everglades, under the liaison of E. Howard Hunt, start planning another attack into Cuba in complete defiance of the president, even after what they had done over on No Name Key. And so Bobby and John send in the same 6 helicopter gunships and burn them out too. And arrest them and charge them with the Neutrality Act violations. And the heads of the 2506 Brigade and Alpha 66 resolve they're going to kill these guys. They're going to kill John and Bobby, who are complete traitors, that they've lied to them. He came down and promised they were going to support them in overthrowing the government. Now they're chickening out and they want to kill him. But they know that they can't get away with it, but they've got the S-Force that's capable of doing something like that. So they're all kind of, just pawing away like a charging bull, wanting to get at the president and kill him, and the Attorney General both, but they can't get away with this. And so what happens is Kennedy, turns out, starts secretly, this is the key to this thing, he starts secretly exchanging letters with Khrushchev. Through Norman Cousins. This guy is running 18 different letters back and forth, completely off channel. No State Department oversight, no CIA coverage, anything. Completely secret communications. And in those letters, they're deciding that they're both so totally traumatized by what happened and how their military forces can get out of control and the nuclear weapons that threat the total annihilation of our whole human species. So they can't let this happen. So what they do is they start discussing how they're going to order, each of them is going to exercise their respective executive authority to start ordering the disassembly of the nuclear warheads in their respective arsenals and destroy them. Not just take them and put them on a shelf somewhere where they can just screw them back on in another week or so, but destroy them. And they reached this agreement in principle.
So JFK was really going for it. He was trying to denuclearize
totally
entirely.
Totally going for it.
And there's this book, I think called Mary's Mosaic.
Oh yeah,
about
Mary Pynchon.
Yeah, Mary Pynchon, who was the wife of Cord Meyer. Cord Meyer, World War II veteran who I believe came back with I think an eye patch, and he turned him into a pacifist, and then he sort of got in with the Alan Dulles kind of intel cabal, and became this kind of warmonger who I think later was in charge of Operation Mockingbird, so incepting
he was the
journalism world with intel assets, but also became this kind of bloodthirsty guy. And so his wife, Mary
Pynchon Meyer, was murdered.
She was an artist, and she was kind of a little more kind of spiritual, hippy dippy, and
LSD stuff.
So she had an affair with JFK.
Even more than that. I mean, it was a prolonged,
ongoing
relationship. She became, in a certain sense, his actual sort of mistress.
And they did LSD together.
Yes.
And I don't know.
Provided by Tim Leary.
That's wild. Provided by Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary
That's crazy.
Actually provided it to him. I know the guy that knows him.
Of course you do.
Did it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Are you still lugging around one of those bulky, worn-out wallets?
You know, I am.
Your posture's not great due to that wallet.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
I'm currently now more self-aware of my posture.
It might be time for an upgrade.
Oh, what do you suggest?
My personal suggestion is Ridge Wallet. Look at this sleek design. Do you see it?
Oh, wow. So sleek.
Yeah. Pretty sleek. Uh-huh. This thing holds up to 12 cards plus cash.
All in a slim, durable, and stylish package, too.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Ridge wallets feature RFID blocking technology, so digital pickpockets won't stand a chance. Plus, with their AirTag attachment, you'll never lose your wallet again. Where'd it go?
I lost my wallet.
Where'd it go?
I was just checking my AirTag. Easy.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I was recently in the Colorado mountains, and if I had lost my Ridge wallet, I would have no problem tracking it down, even in the Rockies. Right now, Ridge is having their once-a-year anniversary sale. So get up to 40% off at ridge.com/cosmic. Just head to ridge.com/cosmic to see their biggest sale of the year. After you purchase, they will ask about where you heard about them. Where did they hear about Ridge Wallet, Chris?
Right. They heard it here first on American Alchemy.
Yeah.
Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Upgrade your wallet. Thank me later.
And then I think they do LSD together, JFK and Mary Meyer, and this is sort of rumor mill stuff, so I'm curious to get your take. After that, JFK, because she has this mission of like, I need to like stop these guys, like her husband, Gordon Meyer, and all of his associates are going to like blow up the world.
Yeah.
And she is like, we need to rein these guys in. And she does LSD with JFK. And then JFK he was already more pacifist than them, but he becomes more hardcore. Like, we really need to kind of denuclearize.
He saw the light. You know, and he went through this metanoia, as we refer to it, this metanoia experience about how incredible this was, you know, and how extraordinarily outrageous, you know, Curtis LeMay and the Joint Chiefs have been, you know, and they'd already proposed to him this Operation Northwoods, you know, because they were so desperate wanting to get Castro out of there, that they were so dedicated in their mission to preserve U.S. complete domination and control of the whole Western Hemisphere, that they viewed this as an absolute horrible affront to have these guys in Cuba. So they were just desperate to get the island overthrown. And so they kept trying everything to do it. So the bottom line is, when Kennedy is exchanging these letters, and very important, the thing that people don't know about is that Khrushchev recommended that in order to verify that they were both complying with the actual, not only the disassembly, but the destruction of the nuclear warheads, is that they were going to have Pope John the 23rd broker the whole deal and oversee the whole process.
No way.
That's all true.
Are you serious?
That's absolutely right.
Khrushchev wrote about this in his letters back?
No, they did it in the letters. And these letters.
Have you seen these letters?
No, but I know what the content of them.
How do you know?
From Jesuit headquarters, because of John Paul the 23rd, or John the 23rd was going to be the broker. But he dies.
I need to get in with the Jesuits, Danny. I don't know.
Yeah, right. You know, but he dies.
Yeah.
He dies in early June.
Yeah.
So they were working on trying to get this done. So he dies in early June. And what Kennedy decides is that in order to make up for the massive disfunding of the whole nuclear weapons programs in both countries, that in order to have a massive economic stimulus to replace that he wants to, and he proposes to Gorbachev or to Khrushchev that they have a joint Soviet-U.S. space program, that they completely combine their forces and they overcome the whole threat of the Cold War, in that they join forces in going into outer space together. And he, on June 5th of 1962, or 63 rather now, of 1963, what he does is he contacts McCone, the new CIA director, because he'd already forced him to retirement, Dulles, and he says he wants to get fully briefed in on the UFO stuff. Now, this becomes important because I didn't know.
Yeah.
When I found out all that stuff, I didn't know about this other thing.
Yeah, the Harold Malmgren stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so yeah, he asked to get briefed about UFOs and wants to know more. And this is really an important fact. John McCone, before he became director of CIA after Dulles departed, was also the lead of the Atomic Energy Commission. He ran the Atomic Energy Commission. So he definitely would have been privy to all of the secrets when it came to UFOs, given the nuclear connection.
Yes. Yeah.
And so he's asking for that. And then I can give you the little Malmgren piece, which is, so Harold Malmgren was presidential advisor for JFK. He was the youngest of presidential advisors. He was one of McNamara's whiz kids.
Yep.
And McNamara's, Secretary of Defense at the time. Malmgren is 27 years old. And he's in the Situation Room around the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at that same time, the Cuban Missile Crisis, McNamara had put him in charge of cost assessments for these new X-ray based missile defense systems. And so they're doing these tests in the Marshall Islands, specifically at Johnston Atoll. And you have these test series called, Starfish Prime tests. And one of the tests is the Bluegill series. And this is this kind of X-ray projection in the nose cone of these ICBMs meant to take out incoming nuclear warheads, which we didn't have great nuclear defense at the time.
Yeah, right.
And so this was this really exciting experimental thing. And the RAND Corporation had a paper on it actually earlier. And so Harold is in charge of doing all the cost assessing for this. And he catches wind that in this test, a UFO gets knocked out of it comes out of the plume of the nuclear blast.
Yes.
And he freaks out and he says, well, I need to know about this. And they used to call them tag-alongs at the time because they were so kind of, immune to, or was so casual.
Yeah.
And, Cold War kind of intensity was so, I don't know, it kind of just made them think it was just, like normal thing that you have a UFO coming out of the plume. And he said, I need to know. I have I blanket Q clearances. And, they said, no, you don't. This is Office of Naval Intelligence and the Atomic Energy Commission stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they say, okay, you can know, but you have to come to, Sandia Complex, Kirtland Air Force Base, Sandia, where Lawrence Preston Geist, who's the maternal grandfather of Jeff Bezos, can show you these UFO. They didn't say we're going to show you these UFO pieces. We'll brief you on it.
Yeah.
And then he goes. They show him the UFO pieces. He feels the debris. He feels this anomalous debris. It speaks to him telepathically, which is remarkable. Then he insists on getting briefed, or I don't know, maybe Bissell reaches out to him, but Richard Bissell, who was number 2, went on to become number 2 at the CIA, but at the time he was deputy director of plans at the CIA, and he was known as the mayor of Area 51, goes and briefs him on quote-unquote other world technologies and all of these kind of past crash retrievals, including Magenta of 1933. And so Malmgren knows about this stuff, and then JFK, I think a few weeks later, ends up at Los Alamos getting briefs. Yeah, so it's like, is that a coincidence? Probably not.
Well, what it is that then Kennedy realizes that if he can give this information to Khrushchev, that'll seal the deal. That Khrushchev will know that he's dropping this kind of nationalistic competitive thing with Russia, and that they can have a genuine joint space program. And of course, they need to know about what this extraterrestrial dimension is if they're going to be venturing out into space together. And but what happens is when he demands the briefing from McCone, Bissell and the other guys tell Dulles about it. Because Bissell and Angleton and the other guys kept going over to see Dulles all the time. In the Brownstone over in Georgetown, because he never left town. He just stayed right there. Because the fact of the matter is that the reason he'd been appointed to be the first civilian director of the CIA is the fact that he was legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman.
This is Dulles.
That's Dulles, Alan Dulles. And that's where the China lobby is. That's the group of people that had decided long ago that what they would do is secretly fund the rise of Hitler in Germany after World War I
through the Union Bank
to the Union Bank and all that stuff that they set up to have them be raised up to be the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe.
Yeah.
And since the investors at Brown Brothers Harriman, these 24,
and that was the initial feeder for the CIA. It came out of the Brown Brothers Harriman.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was Robert Lovett who actually wrote the initial memo to Truman, saying we've got to reinstitute a major agency like the OSS. We got to have it in peacetime. And it came from Robert Lovett, the senior partner at Brown Brothers Harriman. And so that whole group was the seat of the China lobby, who saw the future of investment, capital investment in the Asian markets, because they already owned a controlling stock interest in most of the war industry in Germany, which they'd extracted through the Versailles Treaty Agreement. Long involved in process they did it. But the bottom line is that when at the end of World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles was being signed, Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State under Wilson,
Dulles' uncle,
was the uncle of Allen and John Foster Dulles. He had married the eldest daughter of John W. Foster, who was the maternal grandfather for both Allen and John John Foster. So there was John W. Foster was the guy, and he was an arch imperialist. He's the guy that overthrew under when he was Secretary of State, he overthrew the island of Hawaii and started taking Guam and that whole thing, focusing on moving into Asia.
Whoa.
That was the whole idea of that. And so that what they did in the Versailles Treaty, he got Robert Lansing, who was the son-in-law of John W. Foster, had Robert Lansing, his son-in-law, bring his two grandsons, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, with him to the Versailles Treaty, and actually as lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, to draft into the Versailles Treaty Agreement the war reparations requirements.
Whoa!
That Germany had to pay war reparations for all the damage they'd inflicted on other industries.
So that made them dependent on the Union Bank.
What happened?
Financier.
What happened? Well, this is even pre-Union Bank. This is in 1918, and so what they did is they said, look, that you're going to have to pay these war reparations. They imposed that financial obligation on them, but they didn't have the money to pay them. And so what happened is the investors in Brown Brothers Harriman, these 24, robber baron families, the Rockefellers and Harriman Railway people and Carnegie and all of these guys, the Mellons, all of them were there. And they saw their future is going westward into Asia, because what they could do is they could secure control over Europe through Germany. And what they would do is they would loan the money to Germany to pay the war reparations, and they would take as security for their loans the controlling stock interest in the Krupp ball bearing factory and IG Farben and all these other major war industries making the explosives and chemicals. They would have this stock interest.
A lot of these were kind of Operation Paperclip based companies, right? Like they were in some cases started and run by Nazis, right?
Well, the Nazis weren't there really yet.
Okay.
This is only 1918.
Okay.
Right? But so what happened is what they did is they set up that mechanism by means of which the stockholders or the investors in Brown Brothers Harriman, called these 24 super wealthy families, what they did is they had the controlling stock interest in those companies, and then what they did is they additionally loaned additional money to Germany to rebuild their war machine, so that they could be the bulwark against Bolshevism, because at the very end of the First World War in October of 1917, the Bolsheviks had overthrown Tsar Nicholas II and overthrown him and withdrawn them from World War I. And so what happened is this seat of kind of a socialist alternative to the kind of investment ideas that were housed at Brown Brothers Harriman, that they viewed them as this terrible adversary. So what they did is they leaned in on Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State, and sent a foreign military expedition into Russia that almost nobody knows about it. A full-scale U.S.-financed U.S. military foreign expeditionary force into Russia to try in 1918 to try to crush the Bolshevik Revolution.
Whoa, really?
And they recruited the White Russians, all those kind of Tsarist Russians that were in St. Petersburg. That whole crowd.
Was Dulles involved?
Dulles was involved with Germany. He was appointed to be the legal counsel for Germany. As well as the legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman. So he was negotiating both sides of these financial agreements, so that they had them owning.
He was the legal counsel for
Brown Brothers Harriman.
But for Germany is what do you mean?
He was appointed by Robert Lansing, his uncle, to be the legal counsel for Germany as well, so that he was on both sides of the negotiations. He was counseling Germany to accept these loans, and to rebuild their war industry. And he ended up being the basically almost the legal governor general, working for the German government. And so that's what he did. He choreographed that entire thing. And so what happened is they got that all set up in 1918, 1919. Then Robert Lansing sent the Foreign Military Expeditionary Force into Russia to try to crush the Bolshevik Revolution in the cradle.
Hey everyone, Jesse here. Let's talk about something a lot of us quietly deal with. Hair loss. This is something that messes with your confidence more than you'd expect. Okay, you might be wondering, Jesse, you clearly don't suffer from this. It's true. The biggest issue I face is hat hair. I actually have very thick hair, but one of my good friends deals with hair loss. So when iRestore sent me their iRestore Elite, I gifted it to him, and I've been amazed at the results it gave him. The first thing that stood out to him is it's comfortable and easy to use. You just pop it on while reading or working, and it does its thing. This isn't some gimmick. It uses 300 lasers and 200 LEDs to deliver clinically backed red light therapy straight to the scalp. This is the best way to stimulate hair growth. Over the past few weeks, I've seen noticeable improvement with my friend. He says that his hair feels thicker and healthier, and it's improved his overall confidence in life. The iRestore Elite uses triple wavelength technology and Lumitech red light therapy. It's engineered for deeper penetration and broader coverage. That means more stimulation to hair follicles and better, faster results. And look, if it doesn't work for you, they offer a 12-month money-back guarantee. I've never heard of a money-back guarantee that lasts that long. Try it consistently, and if you're not happy, they get you your money back. Of course, the restocking fee applies. That made it a no-brainer for my friend. So give yourself the gift of hair confidence this spring. For a limited time only, our listeners get a huge discount on iRestore Elite when you use code JESSE, J-E-S-S-E, at iRestore.com. Head over to iRestore.com and use code JESSE, J-E-S-S-E, for our show's exclusive discounts on the iRestore Elite. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Hair loss is frustrating. You don't have to fight it alone, thanks to iRestore. But let's get back to 63. So he's aware of UFOs and trying to do some joint space program with Khrushchev around that.
Yes.
He is trying to defang the American nuclear arsenal, but also have
the Russian
Soviets denuclearize entirely, mutual disarmament.
Yes.
And he is trying to take the country back, the U.S. back from this kind of military.
China agreed that they would not pursue any nuclear program at all.
Do we have records of that? Or?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Where are the records of that?
They can dig them out because they reached out to China. China only had
he reached out to Mack.
They had a real early interest in kind of trying to deal with the nuclear weapons issue, but they hadn't really mounted a program, and he agreed to forestall the entire thing.
Really?
No
way.
At that point in between basically January of 1963 and June of 1963, at least prior to when John the 23rd died, that was still a kind of totally viable operation that they were planning to do. And then when John the 23rd died, I think Kennedy leaned forward into it to try to make sure that the thing kept on going, and so he decided he was going to get the information for Khrushchev and give it to him as a further sign of good faith, so that they could not only have a complete open and honest relationship by putting some skin in the game, by coughing up the information we had about this, but also prepare for who they were going to be encountering, out in an extraterrestrial civilization. And what happened is on June 5th, when he asked for it, the Bissell, it's almost certain it was Bissell, found out about it, and told Dulles. And so Dulles and the guys started really, wait, they can't allow the nuclear missiles to be disassembled because they have to have them to deal with China, because China had demonstrated already in Korea that they could put 1 billion men in uniform and just melt your gun barrels down by just pouring them on you, like they did up at Incheon and at the reservoir. That's what they did. They just sent in like 1 billion guys, and just stormed them. And so they realized that they could not take on China in the future in a traditional land war. So they needed the nuclear weapons. That's why MacArthur kept saying, what we got to do is show them, bomb them, that whole thing, that fallout with Truman. So the bottom line is that China lobby freaked out about potentially losing their nuclear option against China. So that we can't allow that to happen. And we can't wait a year for the elections. They can probably figure out how to get rid of him in the election, but they couldn't wait the year because he would start ordering the disassembly. And so what happened is that on that June 5th, that he ended up issuing the demand for he did the same thing, the same day. He did this weird thing, which I've never been to quite figure out yet, about printing these silver certificates. He did that on June 5th, too.
Interesting.
He did a whole bunch of these things.
I met Oliver Stone once, and he connects the printing of the silver certificates with JFK's assassination.
Yeah,
that was somehow undermining of...
Well, he was doing a lot of radical things right there. Yeah, because I think that what happened was when John the 23rd died, Kennedy, he was hoping to bring John the 23rd in and kind of Catholic support for what he was doing, the ethics of what he was doing, the whole speech at George Washington University and all that stuff. He was going through this real metanoia at that time, but the act of disassembling and destroying the nuclear warheads was viewed by Dulles and the guys as an act of treason, and not only that, but it was eliminating their ability to actually quell China, and to be able to have access to the market, the Asian market. So what he did is just green-lighted the S-Force.
So this is this kind of sleeper cell.
Yeah, they're just
select group of Trafficante, Cuban exiles who are these kind of killer assassins that were originally commissioned to take out Che Guevara and Castro, and he reoperationalizes them to take out JFK.
Just all he had to do was just get up off their neck.
So who were the three? Who were the two men on the grassy knoll? Who were they?
Well, we know that Morales was the shooter, because he was the guy. We know that Rip Robertson was there.
Were they the two men on the grassy knoll, or was Morales on the grassy knoll? Or?
Morales was on the grassy knoll.
Okay, so he took the shot from the grassy knoll.
He took the shot from the grassy knoll.
Wow,
that was he.
Wow.
The thing that I find to be, in a certain sense, so special about what we now know that actually happened is the peculiar aspect of this is the relationship that Oswald had with all these guys.
And then you look at what's come out about Oswald's landlady. She's a super curious character.
What's her name?
She's still alive, bro. She's like 93.
No way.
Ruth Payne is her name.
Ruth Payne, that's right. And she somehow was connected with Dulles' mistress, Bancroft. Am I making that up?
Yeah, no, this is correct. She actually vacationed the summer of 1963 at a place called Nashon Island, which is right up near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. And Nashon Island is owned by the Forbes family. That's John Kerry Forbes, the guy who ran against Bush in 2004.
Yeah.
Right? They were both skull and bones. They both went to Yale Secret Society. The Forbes family hosted this summer retreat at their mansion. Ruth Paine's there with Alan Dulles, Alan Dulles' mistress. What they discussed is, again, that's not going to be in the JFK files. It's not going to be in the Kennedy
What
files.
year were they together there?
63.
That's so right there.
So right after she leaves Nishan Island,
my God.
I think she either before she went to Nishan or after, she visits her sister in Virginia. Turns out her sister works for the CIA. That's come out.
Whoa.
Then she picks up Lee and Marina in New Orleans and brings them to Dallas, gives them a home, hooks Lee up with this job at the School Book Depository building, which, by the way, the School Book Depository building is it's owned by D. Harold Bird. Dryhole Bird is David Harold Bird is his real name, but they call him Dryhole Bird because he was against something called the oil depletion allowance. He's an oil man. And Kennedy wanted to get rid of this oil depletion allowance, which would have made all the oil people have to basically pay a ton of money. They wouldn't get this government tax break from Uncle Sam. So they all hated Kennedy. They wanted him gone for that reason. That's where you have the big oil element, and big oil goes back way long in history. There's a whole book by Daniel Yergin called The Prize, and there's a Prize Part 2 where he talks about the whole history of oil with John D. Rockefeller and how he bought out all the railroads and would only ship his oil through the railroads so he could basically have a monopoly over the oil business because none of the other oil companies could ship their oil because he owned all the railroads. That's why in monopoly you own all the railroads. It's part of the game. And again, he shut all the business and competition out, and they were eventually disbanded with the Antitrust Act that broke up all the monopolies supposedly. But a lot of these oil people have a real dangerous history of murder and conspiracy going way back to then, and just doing terrible things. So yeah, those guys are involved. And then D. Harold Bird, in addition to being an oil man, he's also buys a bunch of stock in this company called LTV, Ling Temco Vought. And he owns this big share in Vought Aerospace. Well, it turns out Vought Aerospace built all the flying saucers for Wright-Patterson in the 40s and 50s under a guy named Alfred C. Loading.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Built? What do you mean when you say built the flying saucers? Like built the Avro-Car project, which is on record.
Well,
as
the
flying
Avro-Car
saucer?
project was Canada, so that was that's.
But then it got moved to Wright-Pat as Project Y or Silverbug.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But like, so when you say built flying saucers, because
so the Vought flying pancake is a Vought aircraft, and it's literally it's an early attempt to build a flying saucer with propellers.
That was before Avro-Car in the 40s.
Yeah, it was way before. This was even predates that.
That's so interesting. I didn't even heard of this. That's wow.
It's very obscure. It's not well known. And then LTV, Ling Temco Vought, he gives a bunch of money with Ling, and they invest in this right before the Kennedy assassination. And of course, aerospace and all those people made a ton of money off the Kennedy assassination. And then you have deep state aerospace connections to Lee Harvey Oswald because he worked at Atsugi, which is where the CIA was running the U-2 spy plane program.
Whoa.
So.
Well, also, I believe Harold Bird, who owned the Texas Book Depository, he had some connections with LBJ, and then he was also connected with Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay gave him an award for the Civil Air Corps when he was younger.
Yes.
And Curtis LeMay hated JFK.
Absolutely.
Hated him. And, thought that he was, kind of a traitor.
LBJ too. And there's pictures of LBJ and D. Harold Bird together, like going to football games, and they were good friends. So they definitely knew each other. Definitely.
Maybe the craziest thing of all, I mean, JFK, we're painting a picture of him just being 360 surrounded by these spooky people. The mayor of Dallas was a guy named Earl Cabell.
Yeah.
And his brother Charles was Dulles' number 2 at the CIA.
He planned the Bay of Pigs.
There you go.
Yeah.
And Earl rerouted JFK's motorcade.
Yeah.
So
they took it right by D. Harold Bird's building. Right in D. Plaza.
It's like, come on. Yeah.
Now it gets even deeper because it's crazy, bro. Because D. Harold Bird, that he's a big hunter, right? He went after JFK got assassinated. He went to Africa on a safari and shot a bunch of elephants, brought their heads back, and had them mounted on the wall in his big trophy room. A big trophy room full of all the animal heads of all the animals he killed and shot. You know what else he did? He took the window out of the 6th floor depository building, and he put it in his trophy room at his house.
What?
Why? What reason for that?
No way. That's crazy. That's fucking weird. Whoa.
That is like, dude, that's red flags. That is huge, huge red flags. And the fact that Ruth Paine knows D. Harold Bird, she brings the Oswalds to Dallas, gives them this house to live in. And then after the assassination, they go to Ruth Paine's garage, find all the evidence that and then about a month after the assassination, after the FBI has already searched the home extensively, Ruth Paine comes and says, oh, me and Marina found this other note that he left for Marina, supposedly where he wrote Marina a note when he supposedly went to go shoot General Walker and left her a note. But they found this all after the case. So, and then they've used that to blame the shooting of Edwin Walker on Lee Harvey Oswald. He's killing this, anti-communist general, which is really weird because, it doesn't make sense with the narrative of, what is he just trying to kill someone to get famous? Is that Lee, who we think Lee Harvey Oswald is?
That people get, oh, poor Oswald, was just this innocent guy who was just a weirdo and he was just a fall guy, and didn't have anything to do with it. It's not true at all.
He was CIA trained.
He was actually trained by the Office of Naval Intelligence. Wasn't CIA.
Interesting.
And he was in this thing called Operation Redskin. It was a whole different operation. But the bottom line is he ended up being part of this thing that was called the field intelligence. And it was a kind of a private spying operation, the political spying operation that was going on. The William D. Pauley and Hunt, E.H. Hunt, and a lot of the guys, they were funding it. And that was George Willoughby, Charles Willoughby, rather, because when Truman got not fired, Truman wasn't fired. He was.
So what were these operations Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in?
He was doing spying. He was doing spying on progressive groups.
Okay.
Around New Orleans, working with Guy Bannister. It was true.
Guy Bannister is the FBI guy who's known as like the head of the X-Files. Like he's on the weird desk of the FBI.
Yeah.
And so he was 555 Camp Street, is that right?
555 Camp Street.
And so
right.
Lee Harvey Oswald is working out of that building. That building mysteriously gets burned down, right?
By Novell. Gordon Novell is the guy that was arrested and prosecuted by James Garrison in New Orleans for burning down 555 Camp Street, the office where Lee Oswald had the office, along with what was his name? The guy that was the hardcore right-wing guy that was the head of the Latin American Anti-Communist League. One of the guy that was the former FBI guy that was down in New Orleans. What the heck was that guy's name? But anyway, he had an office in the exact same building, on the exact same floor.
Whoa.
With him. And Gordon Novell was prosecuted and convicted for burning down that building in the midst of the investigation.
That's crazy. Okay, who ends up later in the UFO conversation?
Who tried to hire me as his lawyer,
Robert Bigelow and stuff. Yeah. Okay, so it's all so crazy.
Yeah.
So what is Lee Harvey Oswald doing exactly? He's inserting himself into like
he is in addition to spying on the different liberal groups like ACLU and other things that he's doing, filing reports with this field intelligence operation going on. That what he's doing is he's infiltrating the Free Cuba group. And pretending to be a Marxist, just like when he went to Russia and did all that stuff. And so what he was doing is he was designing a character of being involved with Russia and with Cuba. And what the plan is to coax him into taking a shot at the motorcade. Not hitting anybody, but taking a shot at the motorcade, and then he would escape. But they'd figure out who it was. There's the gun, and there's who he is, and that they would blame it on Cuba, and they could get back to invading the island. Again, it was the same guys, the same kind of hardcore right-wing guys that are into this. And so he's all put into place to take this shot at the motorcade and then run and escape. And what happens, he takes the shot at the motorcade, hits the curb and chips the curb, the pieces of the cement flying. And immediately these other shots ring out and kill the president right in front of him.
So you think Oswald missed?
Oh, he didn't miss. He wasn't intending to hit him.
He wasn't even. What was the point, really?
The point was to have a shot fired at the motorcade to be a bungled attempt to assassinate the president and blame it on Oswald, who was a Cuban operations guy, so that they could then justify invading the island.
Yeah, got it.
That was the whole plan, a very subtle plan, and he was involved in that part. And when he fired the shot,
why didn't they end up using him as like he was this Cuban operative? Because that didn't end up being the narrative. Like, we need to retaliate against Cuba.
Well, because he killed Tippit.
The police officer.
Tippit was sent to kill him, because the whole idea is there's the dead guy. There's the lone gunman, dead guy, that he took the shot at the president. You rotten bastards, you're a Cuban, spy. And,
And what was his association with Cuba prior?
He was part of the Free Cuba group. He infiltrated the group. That was when he got arrested on the street. Remember, by sitting on the street corner championing Cuba.
What year is this?
In 1963.
Okay.
1963.
And he's chanting Free Cuba in New Orleans, or where?
In New Orleans.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Yeah. So he was creating this character who was kind of a zany guy who'd been to Russia and it was in favoring Cuba, and then he was going to take a shot at the thing, and he thought he was supposed to help get escaped.
Yeah.
The whole theory was they were going to help him escape.
Yeah.
But they were going to blame it on him, but he's already in some safe haven.
But in reality, they were just going to take him out.
They were going to kill him.
And then he killed Tippit.
That's right.
Sort of bungled the plan.
As soon as he saw Tippit, he just killed him.
Wow.
And got arrested for it.
Yeah.
And that's why he kept saying, wait a second, I'm just a patsy here. Something's wrong.
One statement, please. I'd like some legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that. Sir?
Did you shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man. Did you shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
And he tried to place the call.
Yeah.
He asked for the telephone call to Nag's head, which is Redskin. That was the whole operation where he was dipped. That's what he was dipped.
Ship dipped. He was erased.
Yeah. And so the bottom line, and that whole thing, the role of him, it really disappoints half of the Castro or the Kennedy assassination community. Oh no, wait a second, he's supposed to be a completely innocent guy, didn't have anything to do with it, wasn't involved with these people at all, and they're just these weird things, that Garrison in New Orleans was way off base, but he wasn't. That whole crowd was part of that, in Guy Bannister and that whole crowd. Bannister was the head of the Central American chapter of the World Anti-Communist League.
Wow.
Wow. That's who they are. And that's what he was part of. And so that's how the thing came down. And of course, as soon as it happened, all the people that knew about the S-Force said, "Holy shit, it's the S-Force." There's Rip Robertson, photographs of Rip Robertson, who's the field operations commander for the S-Force, standing right there in Dealey Plaza. You got Ed Lansdale, the photographs of Lansdale sitting right there, and his wife identifying him.
Whoa.
And so that you got the S-Force is in town.
Wow.
I mean, you see Felipe Fidel Santiago on the grassy knoll. This guy's like a radio man. He looks like a Cuban. He's out of place, and he's sitting right next to the Umbrella Man. And the Umbrella Man's never been really solved. They came out with this guy they said was the Umbrella Man in 74 at the House Select Committee. That's not the dude. Come on now. There was a different guy there with the umbrella symbolizing you didn't have the umbrella of the air support to help with the Bay of Pigs, and now we're going to get you. And also being the signal man on the grassy knoll. Did you know that there were 3 yellow painted lines right on the side of the curb where the shot, in conjunction where all the shots took place in the kill zone. And they were painted the night before because Beverly Oliver was standing on one. She can be seen in the Zapruder film standing on the yellow curb on the edge of the sidewalk on Elm Street. And she got yellow paint all over her shoe because it was freshly painted the night before.
Wow.
Now there's no parking on Elm Street, so there's no reason to paint the curb yellow. Everyone knows there's no parking there. It's an on-ramp to the freeway, to the Stemmons Freeway. You know, nobody pulls over there and parks, so there's no reason to paint the curb unless you're marking the shots for the kill zone.
Were there any other actors or people worthy of consideration as far as the involvement here?
Yeah, I mean the question is to how many of the people in Brown Brothers Harriman had to sign off on this, you know, other than Dulles. And the real power was sort of in Sullivan and Cromwell, that whole law firm. You know, that's not a normal law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell. That was legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman. The Cromwell of Sullivan and Cromwell is the guy that choreographed the overthrowing of the Panamanian government to build the Panama Canal. I mean, it was sort of like Williams and Connolly.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, it's not like a normal law firm.
Gotcha.
You know, that's like Sullivan and Cromwell was that back at those times. So the bottom line is that's what happened. And then as soon as the people realized what had happened, they said, shit, it's the S-Force. You know, and so we got to do everything in our power to cover this thing up because anybody finds out it's the S-Force, they're going to track it all the way back through to the agency and they're going to blame this on the agency. Whereas it wasn't the agency as such that did it. It was Dulles, you know, in his capacity as the consigliere, basically, for Brown Brothers Harriman, you know, in that whole China lobby operation. And so the agency went to great lengths to conceal this. And then they briefed LBJ. LBJ goes and gets a hold of Earl Warren and says, Chief Justice Warren, you got to chair this commission because we've really got to quell any of these concerns about a conspiracy. And look at one thing that you got to do. And he didn't want to do it. And so he said, look, let me tell you why you have to do this, he said, because it says, you've got to be sure to conceal the fact that there was an assassination team that was assigned to try to kill Castro. And it was the Kennedys that put it together. And if the word gets out that there was an assassination team that Kennedy put together to try to kill Castro, everybody's going to believe that Castro found out about it and killed the president. And if that happens, you know, people are going to go crazy and they're going to try to make us invade Cuba. And if we do that, Russia's going to cause a world war. And they lie to Chief Justice Warren, Chief Justice Warren to get to chair the Warren Commission. And they put Alan Dulles on, who was the de facto guy that ran the Warren Commission. You know, the whole thing to cover them all up.
Crazy.
To cover and what people do is when they get little pieces of the information, they say, oh, this is the agency that killed him.
Yeah.
You know, and they killed him because he screwed up the Bay of Pigs.
Did they get Jack Ruby to kill? What happened with Jack Ruby?
I mean, that's all the mob. They said, wait, holy shit, we've messed up here.
How did they manipulate Jack Ruby into killing Lee Harvey Oswald?
He was a made man. He was a made man of the mob. You know, when they tell you... Do
you think they MK Ultra'd him because he says he didn't remember killing Lee Harvey Oswald for a long time?
No, I don't think that's true.
You don't think so?
That's just
so then, maybe not, for the actual killing. But then he ends up in jail and he claims that he doesn't remember killing Lee Harvey Oswald, but is pretty lucid. And then he's seen court-ordered by a psychiatrist who is on record as being part of MK Ultra, a guy named Jolly West, who is letters between him and Sidney Gottlieb. We, are fairly sure that he was involved in CIA mind control stuff. And he sees Jack Ruby for 24 hours, totally not filmed, and comes out. Jack Ruby has a psychotic break. And he starts, saying that there are Jews outside his jail cell screaming or whatever, and is never the same after that. Yeah. And Jolly West does a press conference saying Jack Ruby has gone crazy. He's lost his marbles or whatever. Yep. And so
you can't depend on anything he says.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be pretty. But that would imply that the first time around he wasn't he wasn't MK Ultra because maybe he had something to share and they needed to scramble his brain.
Yeah,
to cover it up.
The thing is that just following Occam's razor, you get a real simple line and narrative of what really happened, and then all kinds of activities that are undertaken to cover up and conceal this, end up being interpreted as your principal involved in making the plan to kill him, because it satisfies people's other more sinister worldview.
Right.
But the bottom line is that the threat that it was going to come unraveled happened with the Watergate burglary. Because what happened is as soon as the Democratic National Committee chooses Larry O'Brien to be the new head of the Democratic National Committee, it turns out previously, 20 years, he was the chief lobbyist for Howard Hughes in Washington.
This is an amazing part of your narrative, which is that Larry O'Brien is the number 2 or chief lobbyist for Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was responsible on behalf of Nixon for setting up, the S-Force and working with Traffic Conte.
Yep.
And so Nixon is, because he was a longtime political opponent of JFK, is freaked out that because he's running for president later.
Yes.
So this is in the 70s. He says he's freaked out that basically Larry O'Brien is going to out him as having killed his longtime political opponent, even though he set up the S-Force not to kill JFK.
That's right. To kill
it was
Castro.
to take out Castro and Che Guevara. But he's freaked out that they have compromise on him.
That's right.
And if you look at what happened in the Watergate scandal, the burglary, it's James McCord is involved. You represented him, in the afterwards.
Yeah.
McCord was known as Dulles' number 2 and his favorite guy or whatever. It was, his favorite understudy. And they bug Larry O'Brien's phone.
So clearly, in his office.
Clearly they were targeting him. And Nixon was way up against McGovern in the polls in that election. So you always have to ask the question, was it like, he was paranoid, but was he that paranoid? Like, why would he do that if it weren't this sort of specific thing he was worried about?
That's right. Because if O'Brien were to reveal the fact that he's the one that created the assassination team that in fact killed the president, there's no way you can talk your way out of that in time in an election year. Between June and November, he's not going to climb out from under that. And so he said, we've got to find out whether O'Brien knows about it and is thinking at all about using it. So we've got to not only wiretap his telephone, but bug his office.
That's amazing.
And that's what they did. And they sent him in to do it.
So you then are the lawyer for James McCord.
Well, it was Bailey. It was Bailey himself. Because Bailey, it turns out, was on Index 4 for the agency.
Okay.
Which we didn't know.
Okay.
None of us knew it in the office.
Did you learn anything from those guys about like spooky intel world, or like did any of them sort of reveal any secret? Like McCord, did you interact with McCord at all?
No.
Or? Okay.
No. But I knew that McCord didn't want to plead guilty. He was refusing to plead guilty. He said, "Why am I pleading guilty?" Because he had been told that they were going in to try to find evidence that O'Brien and the other guys were coordinating and financing anti-war demonstrators.
Yep.
And he wanted to get that information. So he thought he was involved in kind of a typical kind of, I guess, meat and potatoes kind of covert operation by the agency. And they've been instructed that if you get caught doing a covert operation for the agency stateside, which is totally illegal, call one of the people on the Index 4. There's William Bennett Williams, and then there's Bailey, and there was this other guy, Miller, I knew about. But I didn't know any of that when Bailey contacted me and asked me to come over to his shop to be special counsel, for the burglary case.
I want to pivot slightly. It's the same sort of, world that we're talking about here. But you have a very interesting narrative about how some of maybe the initial financing occurs for secret covert UFO programs in America.
Oh, yeah.
And you talk about this Anderson Trust and, billions of dollars worth of lost gold.
1.2 trillion.
There you go.
At $32 an ounce.
Unbelievable.
Which is now $3,400.
So what's the story there?
Well, it's what happened is back in about 2000, it was just like 2000, year 2000, that Mr. Aiea, who is like the third richest fellow in the entire Philippines, contacts the Jesuit headquarters that he wanted to have somebody from the Jesuit headquarters, because he'd gone to a Jesuit high school and college and stuff, and wanted them to come and brief the top 50 business people in the Philippines about what the consequences of global climate change were going to be for the island. With the rising sea levels, is going to swamp parts of the island and ruin businesses. And so trying to see if they would mobilize the business community to do something about it, right? So I got designated to go brief him. So I fly to the Philippines, and Mr. Aya puts me up in this 20-star hotel, with this sumptuous food everywhere, all this bizarre, kind of offensive, kind of opulence. And I go brief these guys, and I tell them that what they should do is they should try to mobilize and get the government of the Philippines, which they had some influence with, these rich business guys, to lead the Association of Island States in the United Nations to mobilize a motion on the floor of the General Assembly to have a Uniting for Peace resolution, to have the island states all join together and accuse the United States and China and India of aggressive activities ruining their national security by the fostering and promoting of the fossil fuels that are swamping their islands and ruining their country. And if you can get, I told them, if you can get 2/3 of all the members of the General Assembly, the 193 countries at that time, to support such a resolution, you can get an investigation done. And if you can get 3/4 of them to vote for a resolution ordering those countries to start cutting back on all of the use of petroleum, you can enforce it, and the Security Council can't veto it. Okay, so I explained that all to them, and then Mr. Ayat drives me up to his big mansion at the top of the mountain overlooking Manila, and we're sitting there, sipping lemonade at the afternoon, and he said, would you like to meet the president of the Senate of the Philippines? And I said, yeah, that would be really helpful if we could get right to them, And he said, well, let me get a hold of him. He gets up and leaves, goes in, makes a call, and he comes back and says, good, let's go down and see him. So we go get in his big Cadillac. We drive down off the hill. He walks into the office of the president of the Senate, says hi to the secretary, and we just walk in. We sit down. He introduces me to Senator Pimentel, who is the president of the Philippine Senate. And I'm briefing him on this, how to go about, spearheading, organizing the Association of Island States to bring on a motion under the Uniting for Peace resolution. And he's listening to me, but he doesn't seem particularly enthralled about it all. And so then he casually gets up and goes over and he closes the door and comes and sits back down. He said, well, I should tell you, he said, as the president of the Senate, I chair a thing called the Blue Ribbon Commission. And the Blue Ribbon Commission is charged with finding these 176 troves of treasure that have been buried in the Philippines by General Yakushima at the end of World War II. And each of them has like $100 billion of gold and silver and platinum bars and big 50-gallon drums of diamonds and rubies and precious jewels that have all been pilfered by a special unit of the Japanese army that was deployed all during the 1930s before World War II started as a treasure, a war chest for the war.
Because they were worried about being invaded or taken over?
Well, because they knew that once the Germans had surrendered in May of 1945, that it was just a matter of time that the U.S. was going to invade the island, and take them down. And so they were going to move all of the treasure out of there, out of Japan, and they were going to bury it. And they were going to assign General Yakushima himself to oversee all that. And they were going to send the cousin, I think, of Hiroshito, to a prince, a Japanese prince of the royal family, to accompany them so he would know where all 176 of these treasure troves were. And so they sent him into the islands, and they started moving the gold out in the last months of the war, and they buried it. And they buried him in these like 500, 600 feet deep, big wells like that they drilled. And then they were using prisoners of war to do the digging, and then burying the team that dug that particular hole, burying them with the gold so that no one would know, be around to tell where it was.
So where did this gold end up?
It ended up in the Philippines. There's 176 troves of these things.
Is it still there?
Still there. Oh,
so
yeah.
there is 1.5 trillion or $1.2 trillion worth of gold in the Philippines now?
Oh, 1.2 trillion was just 12 of the troves. There's 176 of them.
And they're still there?
Yes, they're still there.
So who's guarding over them?
They can't find them. That's what the problem is. They're crazy people running around the Philippines for decades trying to find these places.
But
they don't know where they are.
But we have documentation that there are a lot of these.
Oh yeah, that Marcos got 2 of them.
Yeah.
By capturing one of the guys who was who found one of them, and they drilled the eyes out of his son right in front of him with a hot poker.
Jesus.
Marcos did. Colonel Ver, did it.
Who's Marcos?
Marcos was the president of the Philippines.
Whoa.
That was
who drilled
the General Ver was his kind of chief torturer, and he tortured this guy's son right in front of him to get the guy to tell him where 2 of these little troves were, and they got 2 of them. Marcos got 2 of them, each of $100 billion.
What?
But
so what does this have to do with UFO financing?
Well, it doesn't as such. What we know is that at the end of World War II, after they had done this, after they buried them all, and there were maps of them. That what happened is that Ed Lansdale, who was in the OSS, when they disbanded the OSS after the Germans surrendered in May of 1945, that Truman disbanded the OSS and reassigned them all around. And Ed Lansdale, who was an OSS guy, gets made the G2 in Manila. Right? And he knows about the fact that this treasure has been buried around there. And so what he does is when General Yakushima turns himself in, at the end of the war, after dropping the bombs, in August, 6th and 8th of 1945, they all surrender. So there's not going to be any kind of invasion to the, and what Japan was hoping that they could get a conditional surrender, and that they would be able to keep custody of the Philippines, so that they'd be able to then later go in and dig these things up and have, reconstitute the wealth of the Japanese empire, right? That was the plan. But the U.S. bombs them instead and says, it's an unconditional surrender. You don't get the Philippines. We keep the Philippines, right? And so what happens is Ed Lansdale knows that these are here, and so these treasure troves are there. So what he does is he kidnaps the driver for General Yakushima, who would know where some of them were, right? And so he has him tortured. This guy named Santo Mario, yeah, it's his name. This corporal that actually conducted the torturing of this driver, and they find out where 12 of the troves are. So they punch the first one and find the $100 billion. I've seen photographs of it's like a football stadium down underneath the ground. It goes down like 500-600 feet, huge caverns down there, and stacks of gold bullion, armpit high as far as you can see, and big barrels of jewels everywhere. And the bottom line is they punch 12 of these things. And so Lansdale, after punching the first one, and verifying that it's for real, he gets in a plane. He flies from Manila to Singapore to see MacArthur. And he goes in to see MacArthur personally. He starts to tell him what they've got here, right? And MacArthur brings in his G2, who's Charles Willoughby. And so MacArthur orders Willoughby to go with Ed Lansdale in MacArthur's private plane, and they fly him from Singapore back to Manila, back into the Philippines, and back into the United States, right? And they go to see Truman. to tell Truman that they've got $1.2 trillion in gold bullion and platinum and silver and jewels. And the chief of staff won't let them see him unless they tell him what they want to talk about. So they brief the chief of staff, who is Clark Clifford. So Clifford comes into the meeting with Truman, with Ed Lansdale, and with Willoughby, and start to brief Truman about what they've got. Truman says, "Hold it a second. I've got to bring Stimson in." Brings in the Secretary of War, Stimson, brings him in. As soon as Stimson starts realizing what they've got, he sends for his 3 deputies, and he brings in Robert Lovett and Robert Anderson, both not only deputy secretaries of war, but senior partners in Brown Brothers Harriman and John J. McCloy. And they bring them in, the 3 deputies. They find out what they've got here, and Truman decides that what he's going to do, he's not going to tell anybody. He's not going to tell the Congress. He's not going to tell anybody else about it. They're going to set up this secret trust. They call it the Anderson Trust. They set it up down in Houston, Texas. And they set up the Anderson Trust, and they have all this, and they assign. We now know he's still alive. The commander, the pilot that flew the gold out.
He's alive.
Yes, he's alive.
Have you spoken to him?
We know what I'm going to.
Whoa,
we're going to. We know right where he is now, and I'm going to talk to him. To get this thing on the record.
Whoa.
Yeah, but so they fly using U.S. military transports. They fly this gold all out of there, these 12 troves of it, and they bring it to the International Credit Bank in Geneva, Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And then they deposit it there, and then they issue gold certificates on it, which are like bearer bonds, mm-hmm. And they distribute them to right-wing anti-communist candidates mm-hmm. for mayors and stuff after World War II, all throughout Europe.
Whoa.
And there's this whole covert program of...
So this has nothing to do with UFOs?
No.
Oh.
No. But
okay.
No. But what it is it's a mechanism for secretly funding covert operations that are going on after World War II when the CIA is set up and they're all funding this stuff. And that's Dulles knows about this money that's there, so that they're using this for covert operations.
Interesting. And it's wild. Yeah. That's wild.
It's totally separate from the UFO stuff.
Yeah. I think Chris Ramsey, who just did a great interview with you, told me maybe he thought it had something to do with UFOs.
No.
I'll use this as a opportunity to say, Chris, why'd you lead me astray? But go watch your interview with Chris, because I thought that was great. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was fantastic. It was really great.
Yeah. I don't see most of these things. I just when I with somebody that I trust anyway, that I can just tell you until it's done. I know that you guys will tell other people.
Check it out, Area 52. In that interview, you actually talk about an interview with a live alien being. At S4 in Area 51.
That's right.
And care to go into any detail around that?
Well, I got at Jesuit headquarters. Let me see. It must be about. Let's see when that would be. It was 94 that I'd already done the John Mack stuff. So it was like 2000. 2001, 2002, something like that. That I get a call from a guy in northern Minnesota, and he's on his deathbed. Well, he's actually in hospice, right? And he wants me to come and see him. There's something, and he says that he worked directly with Project Blue Book. And so I said, okay. So I fly there. And fly into Minneapolis and rent a little car and drive up into this little teeny town up in northern Minnesota. And there he is. He's at this little hospice place he's got one of these little rollers with all the little bottles on it and stuff in his nose. And he starts telling me how he was a clerk typist, Army, U.S. Army clerk typist, assigned to this special unit of Project Blue Book that was focusing just on the 700 or so cases of incidents which they couldn't explain away. They were just too credible. The sources were too credible. They had too many people had seen it.
What was his name?
His name was Oscar Wolf.
Oscar Wolf or Oscar Lane? Oscar Wolf.
Yes,
Yeah.
Oscar Wolf.
Uh-huh.
That's who he was.
Uh-huh.
He starts telling me about it all, and goes into detail about it. Now, it's one of these bizarre things because my office people said, you got to bring a camera. You got to bring a camera to get this guy if he's going to give you a death.
Did you record him?
Yeah, I brought the little thing. I set it all up on the little table, and so I had the whole thing recorded, and it got corrupted somehow.
But I think Jeremy Corbell might have recorded an interview with this guy separately.
Later, he did, and he also talked with Richard Dolan.
Okay, so we have him on record.
That's right,
Oscar Wolf.
But the thing is, they didn't press into them, as far as I know, about this incident.
Oh, really?
And he told me about the fact that because I kept
they buried the lead.
Well, yeah, because I was interrogating the shit out of him. You know, I was just pressing down on him because I figured he was going to be dead.
He's on his deathbed.
So don't mess with me. So
what do you
shape up. You know, I said,
he's dying.
I could have been worse. I could have said, if you want any absolution, but I didn't do that part. So
the Jesuits are thugs. I didn't realize
that's being too tough. And so the bottom line is, he tells me that the reason that he has developed this kind of special relationship with the commander of this unit that is assigned specifically to investigate the 700 other cases, right, is because he and the commander were both part of this really fundamentalist Christian sect called the Worldwide Church of God. I mean, and apparently really hardcore fundamentalist crowd, and so that he stayed there for years. And when they were working on it, people would come and go in the staff and do field investigations and all that, but he kept staying there and keeping records. And then his commander comes in and said that he is going to be going to Area 51, and wanted Oscar to come with him. And so he did. He went with him, but it turns out it was not just Area 51, it was S4. So they actually went all the way to S4 and went down in the big elevators and went in, and he said he saw like 3 or 4.
By the way, S4 isn't supposed to officially exist, so it's important. The only versions where it exists, you have Bob Lazar, you have a guy named Dan Barish, and you have this story.
That's right.
And I think we're going to get some more corroboration soon that S4 does in fact exist. Then all of a sudden you start asking questions about these specific stories, and it starts to blow your mind. Okay, so you're going down.
So he goes down and he sees like there's 3 or 4 UFOs that are just they've got little garages, like these little chambers.
So it's the same story as Bob Lazar.
And they're just hovering in there. He said they were just hovering all by themselves inside these little garages, like that were underground. He said he saw them, and then they went in, and his commander was going to be, quote, interviewing a live ET guy. Right? So he goes with him, and they come into this other area where there were military guys there. He said, but there was this room, like a standalone room with these big 2-way mirrors that you could see through from the outside. And he said he saw the ET guy, but he was like, 5.5 feet tall. No, it wasn't a little tiny short guy. It was a kind of life-size guy. So big head, big eyes, and he was in this kind of jumpsuit that they'd provided for him. And he was very cooperative. He wasn't being interrogated.
Was he speaking English or
no?
telepathic?
It was all telepathic. It was all telepathic.
So he just saw them sitting across from each other.
He could see his commander walk in, but he wouldn't go because he said I thought it was demonic. That's what he said. He said, I thought it was demonic, and I didn't want to go near him. And so he stayed outside, but he could see his commander having this kind of telepathic communication going on with him. Right?
And his commander was a fundamentalist Christian?
Yeah. Yes.
And so what was the communication like?
That he didn't say. He just said that it was telepathic. He could tell that they were having this telepathic. Well, he probably afterwards got it confirmed by his commander that it was all telepathic. They weren't talking. He could just see that they were having this kind of communication.
Did he seem honest to you?
Oh, yes.
Oscar?
Oh, yes.
So you think that happened?
Yeah, I do think that happened. I think that happened, you know. And
so you think we have alien beings at S4?
Well, no, no. All I know is I think that there was one there at that time, and that he saw him, and that he stayed outside, and the military guys that were there showed him these cards. He said they had these index cards that, and it didn't say whether they were typed up or printed, but they had the questions and answers that were there of things they'd ask him. Right. And so they had a little record of interviews that had been conducted with him. And in one of them, he said that they asked him, you know, so where are you guys from? What are you doing here? And he said that, you know, he was part of a group of beings from different star systems in our galaxy, he said, and that their job was to go around monitoring where life had started in different planets inside the galaxy, and that was what they did, and that's what they were doing here. And he said they asked him, well, who tasked you to do that? You know, who's in charge of that? And he said, well, it's what you people would refer to as God, but it's very different than you think.
Then how is it different?
He didn't say.
Whoa.
He didn't say. And he said, but I didn't believe him, he said, because I thought he was demonic. And so I never told anybody. I never told anybody about this.
Have you ever heard the term Collins elite?
Yes.
Do you think that this kind of fundamentalist Christian commander was involved in the Collins elite?
No, it didn't seem to be.
Okay.
This was kind of an individual thing with him and this guy.
Because they also thought that the alien stuff was kind of demonic.
Oh yeah, no. There's a whole stream of that in the fundamentalist world. You know, I've got that Sarah's sister-in-law is a big fundamentalist, and she thinks the whole thing is demonic. It's a meme.
Have you ever interviewed? I mean, I'm sure part of it is, and part of it might be angelic, and it's like probably.
I think that it's because people don't understand that whole part. People don't understand angelic.
It's probably good and bad is probably way too simplistic of a frame for whatever they're operating on, and I'm sure there are good ones that incidentally do violence to you because of their kind of field or whatever. Once it's like Saint Francis of Assisi has a vision of this kind of winged angel being. It was a flaming torch in the original translation, but as a seraphim, and it does violence to him, but it's like that becomes part of his conversion towards God, and it ends up sort of killing him. But I think the sort of good bad dichotomy is probably a earthly one.
Well, there's an awful lot of anthropomorphic projection onto these folks because they're so much like us. I mean, that's a real challenge.
Have you ever met an alien?
No.
Would you want to?
No. Sure.
Really?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to sit down and chat with them.
Yeah.
And actually figure out how to kind of represent us, in a full way about how good and bad stuff that we do, all of us, but try to figure out what the criteria are for trying to establish a relationship of trust with them, and how we could trust them. What can they do to kind of assuage the concerns that people have about them, in their kind of secretive ways,
Have you ever seen, so you've seen picture of a UFO, which was in the Blue Book files in a skiff in D.C., and you even traced.
It wasn't a skiff, though.
Oh, it wasn't a skiff. Okay,
no, it was just this room that they had downstairs in the Madison building.
And you traced the symbols that were along the edge of the craft.
I did that.
Have you ever seen anomalous material?
No, I've seen photographs of the thing that Hal had. I've seen photographs. Of
what thing that Hal had?
That piece of metal that's got like 17 different layers of different.
Is that magnesium
elements.
bismuth?
Yes.
Yeah.
That thing.
I've
just seen the
layers
photographs.
thinner than a micron or whatever. Yeah.
That's right. That's the one. I've seen photographs.
What do you think of, Hal Puthoff's this sort of godfather architect of the space? He's just, seems to have his hand in everything. What do you think of Hal and his role and kind of ufology?
I think Hal is more knowledgeable in depth about this whole thing than most any of the people that you would meet. You know, can and know. You know, in that.
Do you think he says everything he knows?
No. Oh, no. He doesn't even pretend to.
Uh-huh.
No, he doesn't even pretend to say everything he knows.
Do you think he's worked on a craft or seen a craft?
Oh, I'm sure he has.
You're sure he has?
Oh, no, I'm completely sure he has.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think he knows how they fly?
No, he has a better idea of how they fly than most anybody. You know, there may be some technicians that know more about some details.
Do you think he understands a lot about sort of, I don't know, the mental networks and that sort of thing? Do you think he's sort of clued into that?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's his major focus
from Stargate.
Is
What's the connection between remote viewing and, you know, so you had these guys in the remote viewing program like Stargate, you know, which was formed by the CIA and later run out of the DIA, 1972. He, you know, some of these guys like Ingo Swann would like remote view alien bases on the moon and things like that. But
I talked to Ingo about it.
Did you?
Yeah, I spent like a whole day with Ingo in
no
his
way.
apartment in New York.
Yeah. What did Ingo say about the alien bases?
It was interesting that my access to him came through the Church of Scientology thing. You know, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That Church of Scientology helped put off a Church of Scientology, and Russell Targ was Church of Scientology. All kinds of the guys were Church of Scientology.
And to catch people up, you kind of won L. Ron Hubbard's favor by, you know, there was a case against them around, you know, special exemption, you know, as a religious organization. And there were, you know, I think they were being bugged for a little bit, and they were sort of trying to bug the federal government. They were trying to track the federal government.
They had the door of their headquarters chainsawed off,
right,
by the IRS.
And then and FBI. You were sort of helping them out, and then you made it. You were about to like sign on formally as their counsel, and then you asked them for their...
No, that wouldn't be the way to look. I was asked to be their counsel.
You were asked to be their counsel.
And I said, look, as a condition precedent to even begin to talk with Ron Hubbard, because he wanted to meet with me and try to persuade me to become the lawyer for him and his wife, specifically. Not necessarily for the church, but for him and his wife. And that the head guardian from North America came to my office at the Jesuit headquarters and said that Mr. Hubbard would like to talk with you about becoming the lawyer for him and his wife, Susan. And I said, look, as a condition precedent to even being willing to meet with him, to talk with him, I'd have to be given permission to have access to whatever records or information there is anywhere in the world about the church. And I said, I assume that's a total non-starter, right?
And they give you their records.
Within a week, they came back and said, it's a deal.
No way.
What do you want to see? And so
you could query anybody's e-meter results?
Yeah, anything. I could get anything I wanted. And so they flew me down to Florida, and the big blue cube they've got down there, this big, huge blue building. So I go in, and there's the head of the Guardian's office, U.S. Guardian's office, and the international head of the Guardians, you know, out of the UK. And they say, so what do you want to see? And I said, well, first, what I want to see is the file you've got on me. And the American guy said, no, I don't, no. And I said, excuse me. I said, what do you think, I fell off some melon wagon somewhere? I said, you know, you're going to have me to be L. Ron Hubbard's attorney, and you don't have any file on me at all? And the international guy says, go get him the file. You know, so they bring me the file. I'm going through.
How deep was it? How much stuff did they have?
Well, they had you know, pictures of me. I was a Jesuit candidate. I was at the headquarters. You know, they would follow me around. They showed me in different restaurants, you know, and meeting with people. You know, Mark Lane and some of the other guys. You know,
Mark Lane. He was like Kennedy assassination investigator.
Yeah, Rush to Judgment. He was the author of that. You know, so you know they had all these kind of things. And so I said, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that it was accurate, you know. And then so the international guy says to me, okay, so what else do you want to see? I said, I want to see the 3 most sensitive files in the entire world, according to you, as the head of the Guardian's office, you know. And he just went, oh, fuck, he said. I said, so either you get him or not, you know. So he gets up and is gone, and rummages around, comes back, and he ends up laying one of the files in front of me, and I started looking at it, and it was all reports by Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann was filing reports with the head Guardian office in the UK about the entire internal operations of the Office of Naval Intelligence remote viewing program that they were doing. He was just giving them all the information.
So he was a spy or something?
Yeah, no, he was a spy for the Church of Scientology.
For the Church of Scientology?
Over and against the Office of Naval Intelligence.
Why would he do that?
Because he was a high-level clearer. That was his loyalty group. His
so
fundamental loyalty.
He was loyal to them prior to...
That's right. That's right. Over and above
Because I always thought Puthoff was like looking into that stuff, because he was like an NSA guy before he was a Scientology guy. So I thought Puthoff was just like tasked to like looking into this, you know, very, para-governmental intelligence organization that is Scientology, that's seen as a threat, and so, you know, get Puthoff in there.
No, this was the stuff. I mean, the Church of Scientology, you're not aware of it, that their highest principle in the Church of Scientology is all to do with UFOs.
Really?
They believe that there is a major confrontation going on between the human-like people from the Pleiades over and against the reptilians from Zeta Reticuli, and that there's a major confrontation going on over which of them is going to actually assert major relations with our planet.
Do you agree with that worldview?
No, I don't.
But Swann was like fully in with the Scientologists and was giving them information on the Office of Naval Intelligence.
All of it.
And so you're also saying that there's a remote viewing program that was deeper than Stargate? Because that wasn't Office of Naval Intelligence. That was DIA after CIA.
Yep. No, this was a program. And Pat Price, I'll give you some idea how deep this goes. Pat Price, you know, they had the file, Ingo Swann had the file that Pat Price had gotten so good at remote viewing that they assigned him a task of, they gave him the exact longitude and latitude down to the minute and second of a location, and he was assigned an artist so that he didn't have to do these hen scratches trying to show it. But he was saying, you know, so what's there? So there's this major building here, and there's big fence up with razor wire on the top of it and everything. And his facilitator was Russell Targ. And so Russell was saying, okay, now can you get inside the fence? Can you see anything inside the fence? And he goes, yeah, okay, all right, yeah, I can see inside the fence. And there's just this no man's land there. Can you get to the front door of this place? And he said, all right. He said, okay, all right, I got it. Yeah, okay, I'm in front of the front door. He said, can you go inside the building? And he said, let me see here. Okay, yeah, I can see inside the building here. He said, so what do you see? He says, there's this big long hallway. And there's some doors on both sides, and Russell said, now go down to the third door on the left. He said, okay. He said, can you go into the room? Yeah, I can go into the room. So what do you see? Well, there's a big desk there and chairs and stuff. There's a big file cabinet over in the right corner over here. Go over to the file cabinet. So he goes over to the file cabinet. I said, second drawer, first file. Read it to me. And he did.
What was it?
Well, that's not the point. The point is that he did it. And that he can do it. You know, it turns out it's an American facility. It's a top CIA security facility.
Yeah, but that's insane then. So anybody with remote viewing skills can get the nuclear codes?
Not anybody, but Pat Price could.
The best.
So that's Pat Price, right? And in the same file, it points out that Pat Price had actually evolved to the point where they could take a full photograph of a Boomer-class Russian submarine, nuclear submarine, and show it to him and say, where is it? Right now. And he would give him right down to the exact longitude and latitude, down to the minute and second of exactly where that is. And he visualized the whole thing and told him exactly where it was. But there was a huge UFO right over the top of the water where that thing was. And it was tracking it and monitoring it. And he had it in the file. You know, I'm going, whoa! I said, this is pretty wild. And then I said, okay. So what else have you got? He says, well, here. And I said, show me the second file. And he showed me the second file. And it was, again, from Ingo Swann. It was a deep inside report from Ingo Swann that they had taken Pat Price in the program up to southern Canada, south central Canada, just north of the state of Michigan. They brought him to this little facility. It was like this little domed little building, and it had these big, huge dishes on top, these communication dishes on top. And they brought him in, and they set him down, and they put this helmet on him, and they had him think a particular message. And they turned all the big antenna down to the northern peninsula of Michigan, that little section that's in there, and had him be telepathically projecting, when it comes time for you to file your national, your U.S. income tax forms next year, file them in this little post office box down in this little town down in West Virginia. And 85% of the people did it next year.
No way.
Absolutely way.
That's insane.
You keep saying that.
So you're saying Scientology had some sort of mass mind control technique.
No, it wasn't the Church of Scientology.
What was it?
This was the program.
This was the program, the Office of Naval Intelligence.
This was the program.
But that's like, the implications of that are crazy.
They're profound.
Yeah.
And so then from then...
Yeah. So you met Ingo Swann.
Yeah, I didn't say no to them then, but as soon as I saw the file on the fair game, I knew I wasn't going to do it. But I had the opportunity to go see Ingo.
Mm-hmm.
So I contacted Ingo and said, I'm being asked to be the lawyer for Hubbard, and, I want to chat with you. So I went to see him at his apartment in New York. And we go all the way upstairs up onto the roof of his apartment that he's got there. And then I started talking to him. And I didn't want to freak him out over the fact that he was clearly violating his security clearance, by providing these reports to the Church of Scientology.
So he was using his remote viewing from Stargate in the reports that he was giving to the Church of Scientology.
Yeah, he was filing not only about his work, but Pat Price's work. The other stuff, all the things that he was doing, he was reporting to the Guardians.
So he's basically he was a back channel spy to the Church of Scientology on behalf of them vis-a-vis the federal government of the U.S.
It was clearly his major
allegiance.
Allegiance was to them.
Did you ask him about, because he wrote a book called Penetration about seeing alien bases on the moon.
I hadn't seen that.
You hadn't seen that? Did you get into the alien thing at all with him? Or?
Oh yeah, because he in one of his reports had a report in there about it was Hal Puthoff. No, it wasn't Hal. It was Russell Targ had been facilitating a remote viewing by Pat Price when they stepped it up from him being able to remote view things in real time to be able to be shown a photograph of a Russian boomer submarine, and then he could locate it. He could figure out exactly where it was down to the minute and second of longitude and latitude. I mean, which was the big deal. That's the big deal.
Yeah.
And when they found it, and verified that it was there through the remote viewing, others to find it, there was a UFO hovering right over the top of where the Russian boomer submarine was going under the water, and it was monitoring it. And when I saw it, I just went, "Whoa!"
Did you see a photo?
No.
Okay.
No, they just told me about it. It was a written report that it was there, and it was just it was following right along where the Russian boomer submarine was going, And that was the only piece that was in there, except when I started interrogating people, because I wanted to get as much advantage as I could of the opportunity that I had here to get information. So I got to meet the guy who was legal counsel for the church, to ask him to explain to me, what the net of all this was. What were they up to here? And what it is that they considered themselves entitled to being considered a sovereign entity because the Catholic Church was. So the Catholic Church has this kind of status of being a sovereign entity in a nation, basically, because they have Vatican State, right? So they insisted that as a matter of First Amendment equal protection, that they were entitled to take unto themselves the same status. And so that's what caused them to be engaged in this fair game program. They believed that they had a right to engage in like wet operations, like the United States does and Russia does and all of that, in which they asserted, the Vatican does, they said.
Do you think that the Vatican and specifically maybe the Knights of Malta had anything to do with the UFO kind of reverse engineering or transport or oversight?
I think that an element of the Knights of Malta have something to do with everything.
And why do you think that?
Because of the people that there were in this Monte Carlo group. There's a thing called the Monte Carlo group that is at the top of the entire Knights of Malta structure. I discovered that there were non-Catholics in it, which didn't make any sense to me at all. Because the Knights of Malta is a Catholic men's club like thing, but there's this high executive council that turned out that Henry Kissinger was on it, and George Bush Sr. was on, who's Episcopal.
That's amazing. If I were to play devil's advocate, I could have said Council of Foreign Relations, Bilderberg. Like I could name 5 other organizations that those two guys were a part of. Yeah. Any other reasons to believe they had something to do with the UFO?
Not specifically. But I'm saying is that anybody who is at that level dealing with international things would have to be involved in this. There's no way that you're not going to be involved in this, because you could be involved in all the other stuff and it wouldn't make any difference ultimately. This whole thing could, to use a phrase, trump, everything.
Is there kind of a mandate or, constitution for the Knights of Malta? The only references I really have are, Humphrey Bogart, the Maltese Falcon. They were supposed to be the guardians of this Maltese Falcon. And I believe they're also the heirs to the Hospitaliers. There was the kind of Templars back in the day, sort of, pre-13th century when they were disbanded, I guess, 14th century. And then they were kind of the guardians of these pilgrims that would go to the Temple Mount in, Jerusalem. And then the medic side of that was the Hospitaliers. That's right. And so that sort of, there's some lineage between that and, Knights of Malta. But otherwise, I don't really understand, what they do. I know they have sovereign status and they can kind of...
They do.
Yeah.
They're a military order. And they're a sovereign military order. And it's very clear that, the guys like Reinhard Gehlen was in the Knights of Malta.
He was a former Nazi?
Yeah, Reinhard Gehlen is the guy that was the head of the anti-Soviet and anti-Eastern Bloc intelligence for the Third Reich, and also became the director of intelligence for West Germany at the end of World War II, at the behest of our OSS. We got him put in there, and Shackley worked directly with him, Yeah, and also Otto Skorzeny.
Another former Nazi.
Yeah. Otto Skorzeny, who ran the rat line, of smuggling them all out of there. And they were Knights of Malta passports that were used.
You're a Jesuit. Did you ever use your Jesuit connections to figure out more about the Magenta crash, which was supposedly recovered, according to David Grush? It was recovered in Lombardy in 1933. And I believe the Cardinal of Milan was also a Knight of Malta at the time. And the UFO supposedly made itself to the Vatican, where it was held for a while, and then I think Pope Pius the Sixth, maybe, then transferred it over to the U.S.
It's the 11th.
The Pope Pius the 11th. Okay, transferred it over to the U.S. So do you know anything about that?
No, I didn't actually. It's interesting.
Do you believe that's a real case, or?
It's interesting. I didn't know about it.
Okay.
I didn't know about it until comparatively recently.
Okay.
So that one never came across the radar.
Yeah.
So I had been pretty well locked down on.
You got to hit up your Vatican contacts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. those that are still alive anyway. I mean, they're all dead. I couldn't believe it. I mean, virtually everybody that was there in the staff when I was there have all passed away.
Damn.
It's totally bizarre. But the bottom line is I didn't know about that one at all. And no one has ever said anything to me about it. And when I talked to Johann Ix, who was the head of the Vatican archives, he's just always just smiled. I mean, and
does he give you a smile of quiet knowing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. No, he knows because I sent the letters to them from Jesuit headquarters to ask for access for President Carter.
So he doesn't give you a befuddled, laughing smile or something?
No, it'd be perfectly easy for them to say, look, there's nothing to this, you're crazy.
Okay.
But no, he knows that I know.
Interesting.
That stuff is there.
Interesting.
And he just isn't going to let me have it.
So you were the lawyer for John Mack, who's the head of the Harvard Psychiatry Department and childhood friend of Bud Hopkins. Towards the end of his career, he started to take very seriously these experiencers, people who would experience abductions or alien contact, and often it would come out in hypnotic regression or through holotropic breathwork, which was one of his favorite kind of modalities.
That was.
And you have his final manuscript.
I do.
And he writes about, I heard at the end of his life, he started to get into reptilians and was like interested in reptilians specifically. I don't know. Is there anything interesting in that final manuscript that sort of shows his overall worldview at the end of this, decade plus long inquiry into the UFO alien question?
Yeah, he really views the entire UFO ET issue as a window opening onto the functioning of worldviews, in our human family, to really explain an awful. I had something to do with that because that's what I was talking to him about. He and I, just before he got killed, we were planning on trying to set up a thing called.
When you say he got killed, was that? Do you think it was intentionally or accidental?
No, it was accidental.
The car hit him.
Yeah. No, it was
in Europe.
Yeah, I was on that within hours after it happened.
So sad.
We dug it out and knew who the guy was. The guy's still in prison that ran him down. He was just drunk, and so that John and I were talking about the fact that this was actually the name of his manuscript is When Worldviews Collide. And, all the Velikovsky, all of that, from When Worlds Collide. So that's what he did. So When Worldviews Collide.
Yeah.
What
was the Velikovsky? What was the When Worlds Collide? What was that about?
When Worlds Collide is an old classic piece that Velikovsky wrote. It's the theory that the asteroid belt is another planet that was here in our solar system, and it collided with the moon or something. I just remember it, and it believes
that's right. It's like the Kuiper belt or something.
The whole asteroid belt is really that planet all blown up into shrapnel, basically all through the asteroid belt.
And so Mack was saying when worldviews collide, like the kind of Western materialist reductionist worldview and
this worldview.
Animistic worldview or something, one that encapsulated life beyond humans.
If you want to shatter the Western mental structures, the Western mind, so to speak, which is now permeating the whole earth in its materialist, dualistic philosophy, the way you do it is you take something that's supposed to be in the spirit world, because even in the West we can make allowance for the spirit world, and we can study it through mythology, through religion, through imagination, through poetry. But the one unforgivable sin to the Western mind is when something that should be in the spirit world transgresses and shows up in the physical world. That traffic is the cardinal sin for the Western mind. So it has great power to shatter the belief structure of the Western mind when that occurs. And that's precisely what's occurring in this abduction phenomenon.
And so he starting to perceive things, because I was some assistance in that, because I had done the master's degree work and then started the PhD work at Harvard on that very issue. Trying to understand things. When you get a really complex issue, what you want to do is figure out what the kind of operational pieces of it are, so you can get them spread out in front of you just like a plane wreck. You want to kind of reassemble the pieces that you can recover and take a look at it. And what this does is it tends to shake down into this octave of human worldviews. That only one aspect of which is their political manifestation. That runs from right to left. From the authoritarian to the reactionary, to the conservative, to the moderate, to the liberal, to the progressive, to the utopianist. That there are integrated worldviews. They're internally self-referentially consistent. And that they're all predicated upon the answers that you provide to these 4 pillar questions about the origins of the universe, the kind of end product, the teleological outcome of the universe is projected, what the ontological relationship between consciousness and the material manifestation of reality is, the big one, and the epistemological question is, that what means do we have at our disposal as human beings by means of which you can possibly answer questions like that? Are we limited to our 5 senses, or do we have other faculties? Do we have other kind of charisms that we have access to that have been hidden or suppressed? Those are the fundamental questions. Those are the sort of cosmic questions. And since we don't have the definitive answer to any of those yet, the way, as long as you have a internally and self-referentially consistent answer to all 4 of those questions, you have a worldview. It's a systematic worldview. And if you can discern what the common principle is that makes all of them similar to each other, the answers are consistent with each other, you apply that principle to any question that you confront in making your judgments. And then you have a philosophy. That's what a philosophy is. It's a consistent application of a single principle that is generic to all 4 of these fundamental questions. If you can do that, and that's what a philosophy is. And then you have a subcomponent of that, your political philosophy, and then you have a mode of spiritual expression, which is generic to that. That's where you get these major world religions that are generic to a particular worldview. And so I was starting to explain all that to him that I discovered, when I actually went back to talk to John Rawls, who's the head of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard. When I was running into these conflicts that I was having with the different lawyers in the firms where I was, they all seemed to be functioning on some different wavelength.
So what did Mack think, what would happen when worldviews collided, and when
he believes that it's absolutely clear that the initial response that we have as human beings, as Homo sapien, to an encounter with an extraterrestrial being is that it kind of shatters the kind of walls of the room, the mansion of our worldview, that all of a sudden the things are so completely different than anything you'd ever assumed before that your world can fall apart, as it were. And so people have this kind of cellular response when you find yourself actually confronted with an extraterrestrial being, that your whole cellular system reacts in a kind of a fight or flight way that your subconscious doesn't have any control over. You just freak out, and so we started deciding that what we wanted to do is help train people that had consistent, repeated encounters. Because we found that to be a fairly common theme, that if you've been abducted once, you've been usually abducted more than once, right? And so that if it's going to happen again, to try to train a person through holotropic breathing to kind of just calm themselves down and to get centered, to try to get mastery over that kind of cellular response that your body has. Because all of us that are alive right now are the end of the chain of survivors. I mean, that's what's distinguished us. That our lineage have all survived, and gotten us through to where we are now.
That's fascinating, though. He's talking about almost like a manual for being physiologically ready for contact.
That's right. Absolutely right. To try to overcome the cellular imprint that we have in us to react.
The allergic reaction.
Yeah.
And it is like if you're, like the 3-body problem, if you're in the dark forest and you are afraid of making contact, it's actually adaptive to sort of hide yourself. You would want to know that the other side is sort of receptive and stable and going to be okay.
Yes.
When you appear.
Oh, that's right.
Because if you cause this,
they get in trouble. I mean, Karen, they used to throw things at him. I mean, she'd throw lamps.
She was one of Mack's patients.
She was one of the ladies.
That's still a little crazy. Yeah,
and she was one of the first people who really got the holotropic breathing training.
So, are you going to release this book, or what? What are you planning on?
I haven't ever. He just gave it to me because he was getting set to go to England to do this lecture on T.E. Lawrence and wanted me to go through it because it covers a lot of the encounter we had with the faculty committee.
Yeah,
it's kind of his account of what happened.
He was such an interesting guy. Well, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his book called The Prince of Disorder, which is about...
The Prince of Our Disorder.
Prince of Our Disorder, about T.E. Lawrence, who was Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, it was a psychobiography of Lawrence.
Who I believe was gay, and he had been sort of sexually assaulted multiple times, and he had this sort of crazy, and then he led this uprising, and...
he's a fascinating character.
Fascinating character. And Mack himself was such a fascinating character.
Yeah.
I feel like his search for the UFO and alien question was kind of motivated by some autobiographical stuff with his mother, who I think, did she die during childbirth or when he was very young?
No. In fact, his mother played this really kind of major role in this.
Okay.
Because when he first got dragged up, when he first started encountering these high-level military officials that were ordered to get a psychiatric exam to try to deter them from really pressing any farther on this. That was the first thing that would happen, that they'd be ordered to get a psychiatric exam.
Because they'd seen an alien or something?
Yeah, because they wanted to file a report. They wanted to file a report about, a UFO encounter. And they were always told that, you don't want to do this. This is not good for your career.
Did John Mack... Was he kind of abreast of any of the UFO stuff from his Navy experience, or no? It came later. Okay.
No, nothing. No, he was a complete agnostic.
Yeah,
to start with, and then he got sent these like Arnie Arnolson, who was the actual commander of the Montana base. The Minuteman base. Malmstrom. That he was the actual commander that filed the report with NORAD about it all. And then they said, "Are you trying to file a UFO report? Is that what you're doing here?" And he said, "Yes." He said it was the most important moment of his life. He just said, "Yes, I am." He says, "I'm not letting this one go," because they shut off all of
They shut off 10 silos.
Independently wired nukes.
Yeah.
Minutemen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was adamant that he was going to get that filed. And so that he and a number of other high-ranking military people had been sent to John Mack at Harvard as the head of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry to do the psychiatric workup on these guys. And after a half a dozen of these folks, he started saying, "Wait a second, this doesn't make any sense at all." He said, these are high-ranking military people. There's lawyers and doctors. There's all kinds of people that are coming to report these things. It doesn't make any sense. And so he started this actually kind of like a little investigation. And he would train them to do the holotropic breathing and get them calmed down and centered, right? And then he was asking them questions. Okay, now you're inside the craft. Look around and tell me what you're seeing. And he was getting them to give little reports on these totally esoteric things, that nobody would really make up, and then he would see if other people saw similar stuff. And he was verifying that. And so he got to the point where he said, "Wait a second, there's something really happening here with these people." And so he called his mother, so she didn't die in childbirth. So he called her, and she said, "Oh, you ought to check with Bud, the Hopkins kid, that he's into this stuff, even though he's a sculptor and artist and all that kind of stuff. But, that our families are close, and he knows a lot about this." And so that's how it happened, is that he ended up talking to Bud Hopkins, and Hopkins said, "Oh, look, let me show you," and he started giving him a lot more people. And so by the time he contacted me, he'd interviewed like 100 people.
Wow.
who'd had these experiences. And so and so he ended up calling me, and when he got confronted by this faculty committee, and they called me and asked me if I would legally represent him. And so I went there and confronted the faculty committee, you know, but very fortunately went with John to meet with Lawrence Rockefeller, and Lawrence Rockefeller, you know, told us all about, you know, his best friend seeing a UFO. That's why he was convinced it was true.
Yeah, Lawrence Rockefeller was a patron for a lot of early UFO research. He funded John Mack.
Yep.
He funded Stephen Greer.
Yep.
I think Whitley Strieber has told me a story about meeting with Lawrence Rockefeller in Wyoming and the Tetons at his ranch or whatever. Why do you think Lawrence Rockefeller was so interested in the subject? So you mentioned that his friend had an experience. That's interesting. Whitley
is the Prince of Liechtenstein.
Hans Adams.
Whoever it was, that's all it was.
He's apparently extremely interested in UFOs.
It was his best friend.
I think he thinks that Jesus is going to come down on a saucer or something. It's like some eschatological worldview.
I didn't know. He just told us.
He gathered, the guy named John Brandenburg, who I interviewed, said that Prince Hans Adams had gathered all of the Roswell witnesses. I think in the 70s or something, or the 80s. I don't know what, you know, and he wanted to speak to all of them and kind of, you know, understand what had happened.
Oh yeah.
So he was very interested in this.
Well, and Lawrence told us that. You know, because he said that's why he was so convinced that it was true, that his friend, who was the Prince of Liechtenstein, had seen one, and that had actually walked right up onto one.
You know,
that was up in the mountains, very similar to an experience of one of the guys that I knew. You know, the son of Bill Todman. You know, Mark Goodson and Bill Todman. Mark Goodson and Bill Todman were the guys that used to produce I Love Lucy and the $64,000 Question, Name That Tune, all those kind of quizy shows, kind of things back in the 50s, and made millions. You know, and I was out at the. We were Mace Neufeld and Bob Ramey had contacted me, the guy that do all the Tom Clancy movies. You know, they wanted to do the Iran-Contra movie. And so they contacted me to talk with them down in L.A. And I was down in the office with Bob Ramey, who was the president of the Academy of Arts and Science. He was the head of the Oscars thing, you know. And so we were talking with him and his executive, his exec, his name, I forgot his name, but anyway, that he contacts me and said, he said, look, there's a friend of mine that wants to talk to you. You know, would you? He told me not to say who he is, but would you trust me to take you there to him? So I said, okay, we'll do that. So we went out and what was the guy's name? I think we go out, get into this big red Cadillac convertible, and we drive off into Warner Brothers, and we go over to the Warner Brothers lot, and we go in, and it turns out that it's Bill Todman's son of Mark Goodson and Bill Todman. So here's his son, who's now an exec at Warner Brothers, you know, and he wanted to tell me about an experience that he had. And that he was in college, and he was on summer break, and he was in the Tetons, you know, outside of Boulder, and he was climbing in the Tetons, and he came up into this meadow, and there was a UFO just sitting hovering right there in the meadow, and he walked all the way over to it, and put his hand on it. He said, and it was like alive. He said, "This is alive, this thing." You know, and then the whole thing started kind of shuddering and raised up. So he backed away from it, and it just went and shot away.
Whoa!
Like that. And he didn't dare tell anybody because he thought that it would ruin his whole reputation and stuff in the industry. But it turns out that he said that his father, Mark Goodson Sr., or Bill Todman Sr., was best friends with he's this big famous author that writes these romance novels. Anyway, that and he wrote a book about it, partly because Bill Todman Jr. told him that he'd had this experience. He wrote a thing called The Doomsday Doomsday Plan or something.
Who's the author?
Sidney Sheldon. His name was. And he wrote like 50 of these, books, made millions of dollars. But he too wouldn't dare ever be public about it. So he wrote this book called The Doomsday Project, a hypothetical of a saucer that had crashed in a tour bus over in Italy or somewhere. Happened to be driving by when they were doing a recovery of it. And so this young lieutenant colonel in the naval intelligence was assigned to find out where all the people were that were on the bus that saw this, because they just wanted to explain to them that this was just an experimental thing, so that they wouldn't be distressed. Well, it turns out they all started getting killed, all these witnesses. And so Sidney Sheldon wrote this book. It's complete fiction about it, and that's the only time he ever said anything about it.
Whoa.
And then went right back to his normal life.
Whoa.
And so Bill Taubman Jr. wanted me to know about this, just to tell me. And so I've been constantly trying to get him over the years. Say, why don't you you
go public?
You got more money than the Pope, now from your inheritance. Why don't you?
He won't do it.
He still hasn't agreed to do anything.
Well, you've done it for him now.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Bill Taubman, because he was perfectly honest about it. I didn't have any doubt that it was true.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
he's a real nice guy.
Yeah.
But it still hasn't done anything.
Danny, it's exciting times right now. Do you have a prediction for the next 3 months of disclosure and the UFO truth?
Some of it's easy. So, the Senate bill is going to get repassed, all 64 pages, exactly the same.
It's Senator Rounds.
It's Rounds is going to sponsor
South Dakota.
it. Yeah, from South Dakota, he's going to sponsor it, and I'm sure that Schumer will co-sponsor it. We don't have Marco around anymore.
Rubio
to sponsor, but we're hoping to try to get State Department in on this.
Okay.
Because there's this whole State Department dimension that is totally inappropriate for the State Department not to have been brought in on this. I mean, you're dealing with an entire foreign power here, and they're being X'd out. So I mean, now that Rubio's over there, he ought to.
Yeah, he's very interested and on record on this whole topic, and
sure he is.
One of his aides was probably as deep as it gets on the topic as well, and was sort of I think encountered a bunch of obstacles as a result of his involvement.
Yeah. So the bottom line is the Senate is going to pass the 64-page bill again, probably around the middle of July. Between July 15th and 20th or so, that they'll pass it and they'll send it on over to the House. We're focusing on Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw is now the new head of the Intelligence Committee in the House. And that's where we ran into trouble. Before, it was primarily Mike Turner, who was the congressman from Ohio, Wright-Patterson district. Was stopping the full bill from being passed.
Is Crenshaw pro UFO and transparency?
We don't know yet. We're trying to get, but he's certainly not anywhere near as bad as Turner was. Turner had his own personal agenda because of his constituency there. With the base. But Crenshaw's a guy that's been critical of things he doesn't agree with. He's kind of a bit of a maverick, and he's got a lot of integrity. Tough guy. He's a SEAL team dude. But
eye patch.
Yeah. But he's not just kind of a knee-jerk reactionary.
Yeah.
So there's real promise there, and so we're going to be meeting with him and his staff to try to get him to see if he can give a leadership in the Intelligence Committee to greenlight the full bill, or at least a lot more of it.
Yeah.
We've gotten 23 pages. Of the 64 passed, with unfortunate some amendments even of that part.
Yep.
But the bottom line, what we're after is the appointment of the board. That we want to get that portion of the 64-page bill done at least this time around, is to get the panel appointed. Now one of the challenges is that Well, our New Paradigm Institute is one of the groups that's authorized to make recommendations under the statute. But the president is the one ultimately decides who he's going to appoint. The Congress can mandate that he do it. They can pass the statute and say the president is to appoint this board. But then he could appoint his daughter, to be on it, or whatever he wants to do. And so we're going to try to appoint. We're trying to recommend a group that is sort of almost beyond criticism. The kind of people you'd really want to have there, and then hope that will cause Trump to say, "Okay, good, that's a good group. Let's have them do it." So we're hoping this year, or at least this side of the next election, this side of the election in 2026, to get an additional chunk of the 64-page bill passed, specifically the part having to do with the board. Okay, and we're going to have, it's going to be a dynamic going on with this board. There are going to be a lot of people inside the national security infrastructure that are going to want to have people in there that are going to continue to keep it as sphinctered as possible, and then there's going to be lots of people putting pressure on us to try to have it be, here, let's have it all, like Burchett, let's just order the president to reveal everything right now, just dump it on everybody, that's, so there are extremes all around us here, but what we're trying to do is kind of navigate our way through to really the dynamic that's going to take place, hopefully, between now and November of 2026. Now we've got the end of September coming here in 2025, when that's the extension that the National Archives has given to the military services and the intelligence community to gather together all the information they've got. Okay, and that's a standing order that they've got. It's still got that wiggle language in there saying in there to turn it over to the National Archives as soon as possible. The Senate bill said immediately, and they gave them the drop dead date of October 20th. And now they've managed to get the House to water it down, say as soon as possible. So my sense is their lawyers are going to push back against us. But so I don't give it more than a 51% chance, that we're going to get any kind of meaningful release of that information. And at the end of September here.
Well, Danny, you're doing the Lord's work, and Godspeed. I'm excited to see what happens in the next few months and years, and you're a really important champion for this whole topic. And I hope that, as much as I love, my own podcast, I hope that you go on like Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan or something. And
both of them.
the JFK thing is so important, and I know both are so interested in it. And I dabble in, like, I've learned, from Oliver Stone, and, read, Mark Lane and Jim Marrs and all these guys. And, like, I think you're the best living reteller of the entire story in a way that is a coherent narrative with all of the players, but you also talk about motives. And so I think it would be great if you, if that was amplified as much as possible.
No, I'd be happy to do it. No interview is any better than the interviewer.
That's true. That's true. Well, I think they're both great, but I mean, they, more importantly than that, they have much bigger platforms than me. I mean, I have a big platform, but they're next level, so biggest in the world.
Yeah, and they both seem to be sincerely interested, and so that's the key, and they're not particularly biased or prejudiced in any way about it.
No,
and because they straddle different kind of worldviews, and reach out to people that are adherents to different worldviews, it's a valuable forum.
Yep,
both of those guys.
Yeah. Well, Danny, it's an honor, man. Appreciate you taking the time. This is always awesome.
Yeah.
Always learned so much.